you. Good morning, members, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning Applications Committee, the 26th of January 2022. This meeting is being live streamed and will be made available on the Council website for public viewing. Could I remind members to follow the good practice guidance, which includes muting microphones and switching off their video when you're not addressing the meeting. Should you wish to contribute to any item, you should write speak in the Teams chat function, and you'll be invited to speak in order about new issues. Should your question or issue be raised by a previous speaker, please withdraw your request so that we deal with the business as efficiently as possible. Usual standing orders apply, including that any votes will be undertaken by roll call. If any member has to leave the meeting for any reason, can I remind you to either leave the Teams function for that period of time, or you could write leave in the Teams chat function and then join. This will allow us to monitor members' presence. I'm happy to approve remote participation of members today, and I'll ask the clerk to confirm said event. Tracy, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. We've got 18 members present. I've got 13 members present on Microsoft Teams and 5 members present in person at the Council HQ. Those are Councillors Drysdale, Giusti, McKee, Sloan and Thompson. I've got 1 member not present. I am being Councillor Ferguson, and 2 apologies from Councillor Fairbairn and Councillor McClelland. Thank you very much, Tracy.
Members, are there any declarations of interest today? Councillor Driver, please.
Tracy. Thanks. Not so much a declaration of interest, but to advise members on item number 8 and Forside that members will be aware that Scottish Borders Council Planning Authority have already put an objection in, and therefore will have a public inquiry. I was lobbied by constituents of the Hughes area in the Annandale, East and Eskdale to ask for our planning authority to have a decision. So therefore I wrote to the reporter asking if we could have a bit of leeway in making sure that we had a decision from our planning authority. I've not declared whether I support or object to the application or anything that I've done, but it's just to make members aware they've got the full history of that, and we've now got the application in front of us.
Thanks very much, Archie. Councillor Drysdale.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, members. I'd like to declare an interest in item number 6, Slagnall Farm, as I know the applicant and also some of the objectors. I am going to remain in the meeting during consideration of this item. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Pauline. I don't see any other members wishing to make a declaration of interest. Therefore, we'll move on to the next agenda item. The minute of the previous meeting, 15th of December 2021, for approval. Members, is that a true record? Doesn't seem to be anything sent, so I'll take that as confirmation that's a true record. And I note that Councillor McGregor has left for a short period of time. I'll now ask Tracy, our clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed at the meeting today. Tracy, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. The Planning Applications Committee will consider each application in turn as detailed on the agenda. The case officer or other appointed officer will make a short presentation addressing the determining issues accompanied by digital images. Any late information, amendments or corrections will be reported at this time. Members may ask questions of officers following the presentation on points of clarification. The Chairman has been provided with a list of eligible representatives who have registered to speak at this meeting within the period specified in Council policy, and no other persons will be allowed to speak. The Chairman will individually invite those who have registered in advance to speak to make their presentation, after which they may be questioned by committee members. No questions may be asked of members. The order of eligible parties being heard is as follows: third parties objecting to an application, third parties supporting an application, statutory consultees objecting to an application, elected members of Dumfries and Galloway Council who are not members of the Planning Applications Committee, and such members should withdraw from the meeting after making their presentation, and applicants or their agents. In line with the Coronavirus Scotland Act 2020 Schedule 6 Part 4 covering the exclusion of the public from meetings of local authorities, representatives were offered the option of joining the meeting remotely to deliver their presentation or to provide a written statement to be read out on their behalf. Presentations will be strictly limited to 3 minutes per person, except for national and major developments, which by their very nature are more complex, where the time limit will be 5 minutes. The chairman of the committee will ask you to come to a conclusion if you take too long. Representatives are encouraged to use the time allotted to clarify any points they consider material and address the determining issues. Certain matters are not normally material planning considerations and will not be taken into account by the Council when deciding on a planning application. Representatives should not raise any new matters without explaining why they were not raised earlier with the case officer. Please do not repeat what is in the report, as members will have already read the report. After all the representations have been heard, the meeting is then in formal session and no members of the public may address the committee. The Planning Applications Committee will then proceed to determine the application. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Thanks for that. Okay, members, we'll move on to the agenda. First item on the agenda, agenda item 4, is an application for the extension to Caravan Park to include additional caravan bases, siting of holiday accommodation pods, installation of sewage treatment plant, erection of site storage shed, formation of waste storage and recycling compound, and formation of additional tracks, which is part retrospective, at Castlewood Caravan Park, Whithorn. This is the full application, reference number 21/0528/full. Recommendations to approve subject conditions, and the case officer is Iona Brooke. Iona, can you come in, join us and take us through your presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Could I have the next slide, please, Fiona? Could I have the following one? The application is, as the Chair has said, for an extension to an existing caravan park. The caravan park is located immediately adjacent to the A746 public road, which is the main public road between Newton Stewart to Whithorn. If we could have the next slide, please, Fiona. So the original planning application, which was submitted, detailed a far more extensive proposal than is currently under consideration. If you have a look at that original block plan, you will see almost centrally within the block plan there is the outline of Castlewood Lodge and Castlewood Cottage. Those are Category B listed buildings which are out with the control of the applicant. Now, the area shaded in blue is the established caravan site. The immediate northwest to the area that is shaded in blue is the caravan site area, which was originally formed part of the walled garden associated with Castlewood Lodge, and the caravan site has since been extended out with the walled garden area. Also contained within the established site is Acorn Croft, which is just in the bottom right-hand corner of that area shaded blue. The area that is shaded pale green yellow colour is undergrass, and it's an amenity area historically which has been associated with the caravan site. Now, the original submission detailed, as I said, a more extensive application proposal which incorporated stances for an additional 29 static caravans scattered around the amenity area. It also included the siting of a storage shed which would be located to the rear of Acorn Croft in the bottom southwest corner there. And it had a recycling compound which immediately in front of Castlewood Lodge on that plan you can see a tree has been delineated, and the compound would just sit immediately in front of that tree. Just adjacent to the compound there would be the siting of 4 timber accommodation pods which would be arranged in a linear fashion immediately in front of Castlewood Lodge. The original proposal also contained details of an area designated for touring caravans and tents, which is highlighted in bright green on the eastern boundary there in that image. And the proposal also includes the siting of a children's play area, which is marked in red just immediately in front of Castlewood Lodge. Following discussions with officers, the agent then submitted a reduced and amended plan, which we can have a look at. If Fiona could go on to the next slide, please. This is the amended plan that we have now under consideration before us. So you'll see Castlewick Lodge and the established site remains in blue, but the area of amenity ground, which was immediately in front of Castlewick Lodge, will, as a whole, pretty much remain undeveloped. The applicant wishes to retain the existing children's play area immediately in front of the lodge, which is marked in red, and the refuse area would again be located just south of the tree in front of the lodge. However, the stances for the static caravans have now been reduced from 29 stances to 15 stances, and they would mainly be contained within the southern aspect of the site. The area that's designated for caravans, touring caravans and tents would now be contained within a linear strip immediately adjacent to the access road, and the 4 timber accommodation pods, which were originally proposed to be directly in front of Castlewick Lodge, would be relocated and sited behind Acorn Croft on the southwestern boundary. If we go on to the next slide. This is the timber pods that are proposed in this instance, fairly typical in design, 6 metres by 3 metres. They would include a bedroom and sanitary arrangements. Sorry, next slide, Fiona. This is the recycling store, again standard in design, 1.8 metre high timber fencing to incorporate the bin stances within. Next slide, please. A modest storage shed which would be sited to the rear of Acorn Croft. It would measure 7 metres by 6 metres. Next slide, please. This is a historic aerial view of the site. I apologise, I couldn't find a more up-to-date version for you. You can see just directly above where it's annotated Castlewick Caravan Park is the built environment associated with the Category B listed buildings. Just below where it's annotated Castlewick Caravan Park is the former walled garden where the site was originally established, and then you can see it's been extended slightly out with the walled garden, and you can also note Acorn Cottage is located in that site. The triangular area directly in front of Castlewick Lodge, which has been formerly used as amenity ground, would pretty much remain as it is in that image, with very little development being undertaken now. Next slide, please. Now this is a view from within the former walled garden looking southeast over the established site. Next slide, please. This is out with the former walled garden, but it remains part of the established site. Next slide, please. Now this site is what is currently under consideration. As you will see, it's already been developed, as unfortunately the applicant went ahead as he was unaware that consent was not already in place for the development of this area. This is looking northeast towards the amenity area. Next slide, please. This is Acorn Croft. The caravans you see to the right of this image form part of the established site, and the caravans to the left are the caravans and the stances that are under consideration. There is an area of amenity ground directly in front of the croft here, and one further caravan is proposed just to the right of this image. Next slide, please. This would show the access road into the site, and there would be a linear strip just running parallel to the access road where touring caravans and tents would be sited. Next slide, please. These are the timber pods that are proposed. Now, these pods would not remain in this situation if consent was granted. The pods would be relocated to the rear of Acorn Croft. Next stands, please. This is the children's play activity frame looking southeast. The hedge, the mature hedging that you can just see behind the timber frame, is the boundary of the site, and the public road lies immediately beyond that. Next slide, please. And this is a view taken from the public road with looking towards Castlewick Lodge, obviously, and the children's play activity centre there. You will see the pods in that image, but obviously the pods would be relocated. There would be the refuse centre would be installed just to the left of where those pods currently are. But apart from that, this view that you would see at present would remain pretty much as is. There is some landscaping proposed that would incorporate 1.8 native hedging and species in front of the boundary of Castlereagh Lodge, but other than that, this vista would remain open as you see it. Officers are respectfully requested to approve the application. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Iona. Any questions for the case officer from members? I don't see any. So we'll progress to the registered speaker. I see it. Oh, Councillor. I never have a few councillors, but Jane Maitland, John Young. There's an echo. I don't know whether somebody else has a microphone on or no, but if you check in, please. I'm Jim McComb as well. Just check, please. There's an echo and it's not helpful. So I've got, in order, Jane Maitland, John Young, and Councillor Drysdale and Jim McComb. Jane Maitland, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, can I ask the officer, there are three things which I'm interested in, I think we need to explore a bit further, and that's the issue of lights and the recycling point and play equipment, the siting of play equipment. First one is lights. I'm curious to know why we feel the need to put what look like street lights in the middle of a rural development like this. So I wonder if I could have some help, please, about what we would normally do with this. In addition to them being quite tall, they're also of a very blue colour. I looked at the technical sheet, and they're not a sympathetic introduction, I think, to the area. So I'd like some advice, please, from the officer as to what consideration has been given to being careful about the lighting. The recycling point. A recycling point, you know, people throwing litter at any time of day or night, bottles, it's really not a very good neighbour. And I'm also wondering whether or not that is an appropriate thing to have exactly where it is, which is right in front of Castlereagh Lodge, or the cottage and the lodge. And the final issue is the play equipment, which I believe requires permission. If we had a request to put a piece of play equipment, would we put it exactly where it is now? I'm not certain we would, but I'd like some advice, please, as to the placing of play equipment, whether we would have any control over where that would actually go. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Jane. Iona?
Thank you. In regards to the lighting, there was 4, as you say, lighting posts that were of a considerable size. There were 17.5 centimetres by 4.7 metres proposed in this instance, and they are fairly typical design for a caravan site of this nature, but I can appreciate, given the rural locality of this, they may be considered by some to be out of context. I think we do have the agent with us today, and I'm sure, having spoken to him in the past, that if the members were minded to approve the application, that we could seek an alternate design in regards to lighting that members may find more acceptable in this instance. In regards to the recycling store, it would be sited, there would be a considerable number of mature trees and hedging between the built environment that was associated with Castlereagh Lodge and Castlereagh Cottage, so the view would be mitigated by such, but I can appreciate again the members' concerns about that. Again, we could potentially condition that the recycling store, the actual location of that could be agreed at a later date if consent were to be granted. In regards to the actual play equipment, it's not a substantial piece of equipment. Whilst it does sit directly in front of the lodge, it's not considered that it would impinge upon the views either out with or towards the lodge itself and Castlereagh Cottage. So in this instance, officers thought the siting of such was acceptable in the current position. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Iona. Jane, will probably come back to you during the deliberations unless you want particularly to come back in now. If not, I'll invite John Young. John, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation, Iona. My questions are on the side for camping and touring caravans. First of all, I noticed there's some very young trees, some saplings there. Will they be maintained? Secondly, will there be hookup points attached for the touring caravans or motorhomes, which I presume will also be acceptable? And finally, is there a waste disposal facility for these touring vehicles and camping, the people who camp on this strip? Thank you, Iona.
Thanks, John. Iona?
Thank you, sir. The no details have been given in regards to the waste disposal, but there is already facilities on site units. So I presume that there is an established waste disposal area there already for the benefit of other people. In regards to the caravans, again, and the hookup points, no details of such have been given. So at this juncture, we're presuming that there wouldn't be any points provided. It should be noted, though, if consent was granted, we would be looking for a condition attached to any consent that this area was only used on a temporary basis and no caravans would remain there for a period of longer than 3 months, just to ensure that this wasn't becoming any permanent features in the landscape. Thank you.
I think there's one more question, Iona, was about the I take it as toilet waste. Councillor Young was inquiring about a waste disposal point for touring caravans who might have chemical toilets, etc., installed within them.
Yes, sorry. I don't think there's none currently proposed under the application before us, but there is already toilet facilities and waste facilities on site, so I presume it would be incorporated in the established built environments there, and there's facilities there for them.
Thanks very much, Iona. And again, John, that's something you can ask the agent who will be with us at the end of the questions for case officer. Pauline Drysdale, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Iona, for the presentation. It was just to ask a question with regards to the access from the A746 to the start of the camping area. It looks from the diagrams, Iona, to be quite a short distance. And we're all aware that these tourers and caravans can stay for up to 3 months at one time. We're very aware of the situation during the summer whereby children get on bikes and learn to cycle during these summer periods. Is the access space between the A746 and the start of the touring and camper area safe enough and long enough to prevent children going out onto the main road and cars to slow down as they approach the site? Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Iona.
Iona. Thanks, Pauline.
Thank you. Well, obviously, there's no guarantee that we can't guarantee the safety of pedestrians and other users of the road, the access road and the public highway. There is quite a wide access from the main public road into the site, and we did consult the council's road officers in regards to whether it could be safely accessed, etc. And they had no issues and raised no objections subject to conditions. So officers are satisfied that the site would be safe if the proposal was to be developed. Thank you.
Thanks, Iona. Thanks, Pauline. Jim McComb, please, and then Stephen Thompson.
Thanks, Chair. I note on page 19, the roads officer indicates the importance of control of vegetation within the public road boundary and along the applicant's site frontage. Is there any way this can be conditioned? Because the roads officer does state no objection subject to conditions. Iona.
Thanks, Jim. Iona?
I was just checking, sir, as far as I'm aware, the only condition that the Council Roads Officer asked for was in regards to the formation of parking spaces, and there was no other conditions attached in relation to the actual vegetation.
Thanks, Iona. I'll get Jim to ask the agent when he presents his case as well. It may be there was some offer of control without a necessary condition, or alternatively, Jim might want to propose a condition if members were minded to support that. Stephen Thompson, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And Councillor McComb has actually raised one of the points I was going to ask about, which was the control of vegetation, which isn't conditioned, but would seem to be one of the measures of making the entrance, which is restricted by geometry, so you can't really change that, but the control of the vegetation is something that is within the control of the developer or the park. So that's something that I think could be looked at further. Just the other thing is about the permanent residence factor. Obviously, this is an extension. Presumably, the non-permanent residence applies to the whole of the park and not just the bit of the park we're looking at today. Just if that could be clarified, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Iona?
Yes, I've already stated that the touring caravans cannot remain on the park for a period longer than 3 months. If consent was granted, we'd also be recommending a condition that none of the static caravans or timber pods hereby granted planning permission could be occupied as a sole or main residence of the occupant and should be only used for holiday accommodation.
Thanks, Iona. Thanks, Stephen. There doesn't appear to be any further questions for our case officer. So we have one objector, Robert Brown, and it will be a statement to be read out by Tracy. As usual, Tracy, and this will apply to all of the statements you read for us or present for us today. I trust they won't last longer than 3 minutes. So Tracy, if you could read out the statement from Robert Brown, please.
Thanks, Chair. Objection from Robert Brown. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Planning Committee at this meeting. I would like to draw your attention to two details in the revised plan which I object to. The first is the waste storage and recycling compound. I object to where it is proposed to be sited. If permission is granted for the waste storage and recycling compound to be sited just over the boundary between Castlewig Lodge and Castlewig Cottage and the Caravan Park, it will be only 25 metres from my front door. We'll be visible from there and we will look down onto it from the front bedroom. The proposed waste and recycling compound is a considerable size, being 3.4 metres by 5 metres. There will be the usual noise and smells which are associated with a waste storage compound. I hope the committee will agree that this will constitute a land use conflict amenity, paragraph 4.17, with a negative impact on amenity of neighbours residing at Castlewig Lodge and Castlewig Cottage in terms of noise and smell. I do not think the large waste storage compound should be sited so closely to Castlewig Lodge and Castlewig Cottage, which are Category B listed buildings. LDP 2 4.21 states, great weight should be given to the conservation of the given asset's significance, including its setting, and 4.22 to not compromise the setting of a listed building. I think having a rubbish bin store in front would compromise the significance and setting of the listed properties. There are plenty of alternative places that the waste storage and recycling compound could be sited. There is an existing waste storage and recycling compound which could be enlarged, or the new compound could be sited either at the entrance to the Caravan Park, where it would be easier for refuse collection, or the compound which Mr Hoy has created behind Acorn Croft, as some suggested. The second detail that I object to is where the timber children's play activity frame is sited. It has already been built and installed. Photographs submitted by the agent in the proposal have been taken from many angles, none of which shows Castlewig Lodge. This is astonishing given the play activity frame is sited directly in front of the front door of Castlewig Lodge at a distance of 40 metres. There are other places on the Caravan Park where the play activity frame could be sited, where it would not affect the setting of the listed buildings or reduce the amenity currently enjoyed by occupants of neighbouring dwellings in terms of noise. Thank you for considering my objections.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Both of these points were raised by Councillor Maitland, so I'm sure she'll get the opportunity to raise that with the agent. So if Adrian Patterson is with us, Adrian, are you with us at all?
Yes, I am, Chair.
Thank you, Adrian. As usual, you will have 3 minutes to make your presentation to members of the committee. I'll remind you 30 seconds to go to bring your presentation to a conclusion. And if you'll be kind enough to wait, you'll have been listening, I presume, so you'll know some of the questions that are going to be posed to you. However, just whenever you're ready, sir, we have 3 minutes, just start, and I'll remind you 30 seconds to go, and we'll see you after that presentation for further questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and hello to the Planning Applications Committee members. The applicant purchased this site in August 2019. The previous owners had secured planning permission under 04P5 0176 for development of the site, which this amended development fundamentally clones. Unfortunately, the previous owners had not discharged a number of conditions despite completing a substantial part of the application's development, and so technically 04P50176 permission by virtue of time is seen not to have been exercised and expired. This application therefore seeks to regularise these deficiencies whilst permitting the conclusion of the very similar development previously proposed. This application's original submission was reassessed, as Iona has dutifully portrayed, with the case officer, which resulted in removing 14 static bases and associated infrastructure from the open park area to the north of the access road into the park. It was optimistic to think that development would not cause adverse impact to the amenity of surrounding property, and the applicant accepts that he has to preserve the surrounding amenity and observe the setting of the listed building. The amended submission was re-advertised, and at that point no new objections were received. Unfortunately, all the previous objections raised in connection with the much larger development have been retained, despite, I feel, having addressed the vast proportion of these objectors' concerns. That said, the site needs to expand to remain viable commercially for Mr. Hoy, and this development would go some way to ensuring the future of the site. The applicant is young and ambitious, and his family are experienced holiday park owners, with a successful track record establishing popular holiday parks which are kept to a high standard, bringing tourists into the area where they are contributing to the vitality, employment and prosperity of local communities. I hope you can agree that this development is sensitive to the local amenity, respects the setting of the listed building and provides a worthwhile investment by the applicant into the local community success. In line with a number of the questions that have been raised, which I'm no doubt going to be asked to answer, I look forward to answering them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian, and thanks for being so concise. So 3 members that asked questions that I presume they wish to pose to Mr. Patterson. So Councillor Maitland first. Jane.
Thank you very much indeed. Yes, good morning, and thank you for making a presentation. I think you probably realise where I'm coming from. I am concerned about the physical aspects of putting the recycling and waste proposal on the boundary and right in front of the listed buildings. I wonder whether you could give us any indication about why that particular place was selected, or indeed whether there could be something else done. That was my first question. The second one was about lighting, and a question about the height and the positioning of these particular lights. I would like to know, I see that we can retrofit some cowling on these lights, but that rather indicates to me that they're probably not very sympathetic to a rural area as they currently stand. So I wonder if you could comment on that. In addition to which, the 4000 Kelvin is a very blue light. It's really not a sympathetic colour at all, and isn't necessary. Actually, I would suggest to you in terms of lighting. Maybe you'd like to comment, please. And the final issue I think I came up with was the play equipment. Again, in terms of respecting the positioning of a listed building, and I wonder why that particular place has to be selected right there. So I wonder if you could just help. It could, of course, simply be a matter of innocent misunderstanding about the importance that we place with respect to these particular policies, and I'm sure we can probably come to some arrangement to amend the problems. Thank you. But if you could address those 3 things.
Thank you. Would you like me to come back on that one, Chair?
Yes, please. Yes, please. If anybody happens to ask a question, just respond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Maitland. I'll go through the 3 main aspects of your questioning individually, if you don't mind. Regarding the waste recycling compound, I have to wholeheartedly agree that there is surely a solution for an acceptable area elsewhere in the site. I don't think that's a difficult one for my client to accept, and it was brought about actually by the fact that he does have a waste compound already to the rear of the site, not contained within this application site, which is inadequate anyway for the site, and it was needing to be expanded. And fundamentally, this was a temporary solution, which, whilst he's done it reasonably well, we can relocate that somewhere else in the site, I'm sure, with the agreement of the case officer. The lighting, I have to say, I wasn't aware that there was lighting on the site. That hadn't been drawn to my attention. Having seen the lighting now, however, it is typical of holiday park sites and typical of the family's use of lighting elsewhere. I can accept the adverse impact that these lights are having, in that they are high, and I think, again, I would be happy to provide an alternative lighting source, probably more like bollard lighting. We would discuss that with the client and hopefully find a solution there, rather than trying to reinvent something that is going to be very hard to reinvent to a satisfactory conclusion. The play equipment, indeed, there was no understanding that planning permission was required for what is such a lightweight, shall we say, piece of plant. And I guess the idea about putting it there was simply to invite the children of the site or at the site to use that ground effectively. Again, I suspect the applicant, if deemed necessary, would be happy to move it to somewhere where there's less impact on the listed building, but that I don't think is necessarily going to stop any children's or other activity of users of the site happening in that area per se. So I think generally, Councillor Maitland, there's probably plenty scope to address your concerns and continue dialogue with the applicant, and in line with conditions associated with the application that anyone might care to add. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Mr. Patterson. That's really helpful. When we get into deliberation, we'll see whether we try to make that a condition or just simply delegate to officers. But it's really encouraging your thoughts on that, the points that Councillor Maitland have raised. And just in the sequence of earlier speakers, I'm going to invite John Young next, then Jim McComb, and then I believe Stephen Thompson had an issue as well, and then I'll see if there are any other members wishing to speak. So, John Young, you had a question about waste.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, Mr. Patterson. Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to ask a couple of things. Will there be electrical hookup points for the touring section of the expansion of the Caravan site? Secondly, will there be waste disposal points for the grey water and the black water from touring caravans? And finally, will there be a external fresh water supply to service the touring area of the Caravan site? Thank you, Mr. Patterson.
Thank you. Thank you for those points. Clear, and I understand them all exactly. Thank you. Hookup points. I haven't actually had a discussion with the client on this, but I would assume from their other sites that, yes, hookup points would be a part of their touring area, and they're likely to manifest themselves with single bollard type hookup points, one bollard serving at least two adjacent touring caravans or camper vans. And I think you would want that to be included rather than not included in the application, if that was the case. The waste disposal that you're talking about, currently there is absolutely on-site ablutions for the safe and appropriate disposal of all waste from touring and visiting caravans and campervans. And similarly, there already exists freshwater points for those caravans.
Sorry, that's my landline. I don't know who that would be.
Okay.
My apologies. I can't put my phone in silent, my landline, so I do apologise.
That's okay, thank you. So I was just I was saying about the freshwater. There are already freshwater standpipes available for touring campers, both on the site, and there would be there's no anticipation for extending the freshwater points into this development. Thank you.
That answers my questions. Thank you, Mr. Patterson.
Thanks very much, John. Jim McComb, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Patterson, do you feel the applicant would be happy to accept a condition enforcing control of vegetation along the frontage of the site in order to maintain maximum visibility?
In answer to your question, Mr. McComb, categorically yes.
Thank you for that unequivocal answer. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen, you did ask a question. Are you satisfied, or do you have a question for the applicant's agent?
Thanks, Chair. It's been answered in response to Councillor McComb. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Are there any other members for questions for the applicant's agent? Councillor Drysdale, please.
Thanks very much, Stephen, for the presentation. Not Stephen, pardon me, Mr. Patterson. I can't see it very closely on the screen, apologies. Mr. Patterson, what levels of mitigation will be implemented between the camping and touring caravan site, or the strip, to the exit and entrance of the A746, as I have concerns regarding the proximity to the main road? Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Drysdale. We haven't discussed this in depth with the applicant, as he hasn't felt that it's been an issue for him at Castlewig, and similarly at the family's other sites, and they have numerous sites. Generally, I think they find that the occupants of their sites are fairly self-regulating in the of their children, and that no specific measures necessarily are taken into account to prevent children from exiting the site. I think it's part of their almost education in the countryside up to a point, but I guess the only thing that could be suggested would be signage. I have seen signage at other of their sites, just warning of the like you're exiting the site and you're going onto a public road. I think that's as much as I can provide on that matter at the moment.
Thanks very much, Pauline. And thanks, Mr. Patterson.
Can I come back in, Chair, at all?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's interesting comments. What's the actual distance from the edge of... So the last pitch will be almost, 10, 20 metres from the road, would you say? If you could just give me detail on that. And I think going forward, I certainly would like it to be considered that there be some kind of gated operation at the start of the site if it is very close, because you have potential of a serious accident taking place, and I think we have to take that into consideration during this meeting. Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Pauline.
In there, sorry.
Yeah, carry on, Mr. Patterson.
Sorry, thank you, Councillor Drysdale. Thank you again for your comments. So there would be the expectation of a minimum of 25 metres from the nearest either hookup point or mobile home base, which is rather in line with the roads department's design of a road meeting a main road. That would be my only sort of satisfactory backup from a distance point of view.
Thanks for that, Mr. Patterson. If Pauline has a further issue, we'll raise that when we're in session, and we'll deal with either by delegation to officers or conditions if other members think that's appropriate. So if we have no other questions for the applicant's agent, thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Patterson, and for your helpful responses.
Thank you.
Members, we're in session. Before we... Oh, Councillor Driver, I was going to say before we start any consideration, we might want to decide whether or no some of the points members raised should be conditions or delegated to officers. And I'm just going to ask Iona, or if she wants to defer to David City, whether or no some of the elements we discussed could be delegated or whether it be better conditioned. But given that there's a couple of members wanting to speak, I'll see what they have to say first, then I'll go to Iona. So Councillor Driver first, then Councillor Maitland, given there's a number of things we need to address beyond the officer's recommendation. Archie?
Thanks very much, Chair. It was just what you mentioned was what I was going to ask Iona to see whether we can condition those things that the members have raised. I think they're very pertinent things that the members have actually raised. Although I would have a concern about, the road safety issues that Councillor Drysdale has raised, and if we can condition something on that. Obviously, it's a business that's trying to expand, and we would have too much cost on the individual to expand his business as well. But I would go with what you're saying, Chair, about listening to Iona to see whether we can delegate that to the officer or condition it.
Yeah, thanks, Archie. And you're right about Pauline suggested a gate, but we've only ever been invited to place conditions that are reasonable, and there's nothing to stop a gate being permanently open, and we don't have officers to manage that on a day-by-day basis, but I'll leave that to other members to decide how they feel about that. Councillor Maitland?
No, could we possibly have the officers explain to us about conditioning or delegating? That would be helpful.
Yeah, that was what I did suggest, Jane. OK, Iona, it's up to you. Do you want to help us, or we defer to David?
I think I'll refer to David in this one.
Wise move, Iona. David, so members are suggesting one or two changes that the applicant's agent seems willing to address. How best do we deal with this?
Morning, Chair. Morning, members. I'm maybe slightly puzzled by the phrase about do you attach it as conditioned or delegate it to officers. Basically, as a committee today, you're determining the application, so it is in your gift as a committee as to whether or not you wish to attach any conditions. Obviously, between myself and Laura, we're happy to advise about the competency of such conditions. The ones I've scribbled down were to do with lighting, the siting of the recycling, and the siting of the play equipment. There was also mention of the control of vegetation. I would suggest that, and certainly other road safety issues such as children riding out on the public road, the latter one, I certainly do not think that there's an ability to use planning conditions to control that. Remembering this is an existing authorised development on the site. In terms of the vegetation, there are powers under the Road Scotland Act for the Roads Authority to require any vegetation which is obstructing view to be removed. So you shouldn't normally be attaching conditions that are covered by other legislation or regulations. I would have no problem at all about suspensive conditions requiring further details to be submitted about external lighting. Indeed, we would have probably attached directives about external lighting anyway, but if members would
be more comfortable with explicit conditions about lighting. That's no problem. The reciting of the recycling, we've heard from the agent, Mr. Patterson, on that, and indeed with play equipment. So quite happy to attach conditions requiring details of where they would be relocated. The only other one in discussion, when I saw the slides, I suddenly realised that you've actually got a couple of pods sitting on site at the moment, which Iona mentioned would be relocated, but actually there's no condition requiring them to be relocated. They'll be unauthorised, but I think for the avoidance of a doubt, it would be useful to have a condition making clear that the committee is not granting permission for those pods in that situation, that they need to be relocated within a prescribed time period. But I hope that helps. Happy to answer any other questions members may have.
Thanks very much, David. No, and you've probably done the right thing by saying a directive. And I think the point I was trying to make was there's no point in us put a condition. It rightly said they would consider something in discussion with officers. So somebody would have to determine what's appropriate and what's not. So can you just then, for the avoidance of any doubt on members, come with a suggestion about what we should do with a directive, and then I'll go and see if that's what members wish to proceed with. The directive would not include gates or vegetation, according to you, but would deal with lighting, storage area and play equipment.
Chair, well, from what I've heard from the concerns of members, what I would be suggesting is the imposition of additional conditions, not directives. Suspensive conditions, in other words, no further development shall take place unless and until further details have been submitted to and agreed in writing, the usual wording by the planning authority. So I would suggest that what you're really talking about is possibly a minimum of 2 additional conditions, one to do with the external lighting, so requiring a detailed scheme to be submitted and approved. And obviously officers will take on board the concerns about members about the type of lighting, and certainly preventing any spillage above the horizontal and being as low power as possible. I wonder if you could actually have a single catch-all condition that would require details of the reciting of the recycling facility, the play equipment and the pods as one condition, just requiring details of all that to be submitted and again approved in writing before any further development takes place. Beyond that, I don't think I would recommend that you attach any other conditions or directives to this one. It might be useful to check with Laura Whitelaw's solicitor just to make sure that Laura's comfortable with what I'm saying.
I will do that, David. I'm hoping that'll have given Councillor Maitland and Councillor Driver some comfort. I've got them both looking to speak. Then before we do anything else, I'll speak to Laura. So Councillor Maitland, then Councillor Driver.
Oh, thank you very much. I think I've overtaken Councillor Driver, but really, what has been said up till now, I think, makes what was an application which maybe was not acceptable through conditioning, it has become acceptable, and I'm very happy to take this forward because, as other members have said, Chairman, this is investment, and we absolutely welcome that. It just has to be made acceptable for our circumstances here in Dumfries and Galloway. So I'm very happy with what has been proposed. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much, Jane. And my apologies, Councillor Driver, if I jumped Jane in the queue. Archie.
It's all right, Jim. You're always pushing somebody else in front of me anyway, so I didn't really do that. I'm quite happy with what Councillor Maitland actually said. I think the applicant's agent has said quite clearly that he's willing to discuss this and come to some form of a agreement and arrangement with the planning officer, so I'm happy to second that.
Brilliant. Okay. Councillor McKee, followed by Councillor Giusti.
Aye, thanks, Chair. It's just I'm sitting here and people are asking for different things in different places. Would it not have been possible to supply a kind of layout plan for the whole site? And that would have helped us to be able to identify. We're talking about moving waste facilities and that sort of thing. And to me, we're just putting its fingers in the air type of thing. Maybe the planners can explain why they did they didn't look for a layout plan. Sorry about that, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor McKee. I think what happened was the application was submitted, the officers accepted it, and we're saying it's no. So we're now telling the applicant to bring forward a different plan, and we've given our officers instruction or guidance as what we want to see happen. And members have sort of felt that that's an appropriate or a suitable approach. Does that sound about right, Iona?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's correct. The block plan that I was able to show you did detail all the items that you have been discussing. But as the Chair has said, that if these do not detail where you're proposing how to have them relocated, obviously we would require a new block plan to be submitted to ourselves if there were conditions just to show the final siting of such, should the consent be granted with conditions attached. Thank you.
Excellent, Iona. Thanks very much for your help. Councillor Juice and Councillor Thompson, hopefully we'll get to some decision after that. Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. I'm pretty happy with the conditions that Councillor Maitland's put forward, bar one. Personally, I don't see an issue with the play equipment. I'd be happy to put that to an amendment. That way, go with all of Councillor Maitland's conditions, barring the movement of the play equipment, which I think's appropriate.
Okay, in that case, you have to put an amended proposal, because it would appear that, unless I'm misinterpreting what's being said, Councillor Maitland's supporting the new proposal that we've been given guidance on how we set that out, and Councillor Driver has supported that as well. Stephen Thompson, please.
Thanks, Chair. And it's just, maybe it's just a point I need just fully clarified, but the control of vegetation issue, I think my only question remains about that which is within the applicant's site as opposed to that which is within the public road boundary. So I accept that the Roads Authority may be able to act on one more easily than the other, and it might be worth just having that specifically clarified, that vegetation within the applicant's site frontage should be controlled to ensure maximum visibility, just to be safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. I'll ask Iona again, because the applicant's agent said quite clearly he'd be content to have that done, but advice is we should not make that a condition. But Iona, what's your advice on who's the most responsible body for that? Is it the developer, the applicant, or the Roads Authority? Who places conditions like that generally?
David may be able to assist here, but certainly I think we could attach the conditions that the applicant would have to have the vegetation at a certain, to keep the vegetation at a certain height, etc., just to keep the visibility clear to satisfy members in this instance, if that is what is required.
Thanks, Iona. I'll just check with David then. Is it legitimate or reasonable to place a condition on vegetation maintenance at the junction with the road boundary?
I would be hesitant to do that, the reason being that this is an extension of an existing activity. So unless there were conditions on the original permission which made those requirements, you would have to be very satisfied that the additional amount of volume here justified that, and bearing in mind the comments of the roads officers. Again, it might be worth just getting a legal opinion on that from Lauren.
Just what I'll do before Archila, here I can't even see it right. I don't want this to become the lengthiest meeting we've ever had. Laura, advice please, if you can, and then I've got Archie Driver and Ivor Hislop to speak. Laura, please, advice, given that it's an existing permission and there's obviously, it would appear, no condition present on the existing permission.
Thank you, Chair. Under the Roads Scotland Act 1984, the Council acting as Roads Authority has certain powers with respect to vegetation that is straying onto the public road. The powers depend on whether the vegetation is within the road boundary or it's within land adjacent to the road boundary. But there are existing powers of enforcement if there is a problem with vegetation coming onto the road. And as David says, we wouldn't normally attach a condition to deal with a problem that the Council has got powers to deal with through statute.
That's really helpful. Thanks, Laura. OK, Councillor Driver and then Councillor Hislop.
Thanks, Chair. I'm getting a bit worried that we're getting a bit big brother here. The applicant has put an application in for the site, and I was happy with what Jane had said and things like that, and I'm still happy with that. Any further things? I mean, the applicant will want his site to be as nice as possible for members of the public to actually use. So I would imagine this will be part of his own maintenance anyway. So I wouldn't be happy putting another condition on.
Okay, thanks for that. So I'll just check that you and Jane are content with what was suggested previously before we go to any further proposals. Councillor Hislop and then Councillor McComb.
Chair, it was just to agree with Councillor Giusti. I think the play equipment's fine where it is, so I would second his proposal.
Okay, then we're going to a vote. Okay, Councillor McComb. Maybe lost Jim McComb. Jim, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
With regard to vegetation, the issue here is not vegetation growing onto the roadway. It is vegetation obscuring sight lines and therefore posing a risk to road safety.
But as Laura Whitelaw explained, we have statutory powers to deal with that, and it's unusual for the council to place a condition when we have statutory power to act in any case.
Very good, Chair.
Jane Maitland, please. Hopefully lastly.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Yes, I'm going to continue with my original proposal as seconded by Councillor Dryber, if I might please. And the reason that I'm concerned about the play equipment is because of the setting of the listed building. If it wasn't for that, I would have absolutely no problem at all. But the agent has indicated that the applicant would be willing to negotiate with the council as to where it should actually be sited to be in a more sensitive place. And I think there's an opportunity to make even better use of that amenity land, using the equipment as a lure. So I'm sure that will be the right thing to do. And I continue to suggest that I go forward with that, my motion. Thank you very much.
Jane. I'll just get Archie to clarify, then I'll get Andrew, Giusti and Ivor to clarify that they're happy with the other conditions that have been proposed. Then I'll ask Tracy to read out what the proposal and the amendment is, then we'll go to the vote. So Archie, you content with Councillor Maitland's observations and what she wants to do?
Yes, absolutely, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Giusti, you content with other conditions? The only one you don't want implemented is in relation to the current location of the play equipment. Is that right?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Ivor, are you content with that as well?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Tracy, can you just remind members what the motion and amendment is, please, and then take us to the vote?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the motion is proposed by Councillor Maitland, seconded by Councillor Dryber, and that's to approve the application subject to the 4 conditions detailed in the report, with additional conditions for which should be detailed schemes submitted to the Planning Authority and agreed in writing prior to any development on the external lighting, the waste storage and recycling and the play equipment. And the amendment is proposed by Councillor Giusti, seconded by Councillor Hislop. And it's the same as what I've just read out, but it won't include the condition on the play equipment.
Thanks very much, Tracy.
Okay, Chairman.
Motion.
Vice Chair.
Motion.
Councillor Blake.
Motion.
Councillor Crothers.
Motion.
Councillor Dryber.
Motion.
Councillor Drysdale.
Motion.
Councillor Ferguson.
Motion.
Councillor Giusti.
Amendment.
Councillor Hislop.
Amendment.
Councillor Lever.
Motion.
Councillor McComb.
Motion.
Councillor McKee.
Motion.
Councillor Maitland.
Motion.
Councillor Martin.
Amendment.
Councillor Sloan. Councillor Tate.
Amendment.
Councillor Thompson.
Motion.
Councillor Young.
Motion.
And the motion is carried 13 votes to 5. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Move on to agenda item number 5. An application for the erection of dwelling house at land adjacent to 1 and 3 Hazel Grove, Stranraer. This is a full application, reference number 21/1684/full. The recommendation is approved, subject to conditions, and the case officer again is Iwana Brooke. Iwana, will you take us through this presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. If we can just go on to the next slide. The application is indeed for the erection of a single dwelling house. It is on an infill site within a residential area contained within the settlement boundary of Stranraer. We can have the next slide, please. That's just a more accurate location plan. You will see Woodland Road immediately in the front of the site and houses associated with Hazel Grove to the rear. Next slide, please. The application is for a bungalow, a single-storey 3-bed dwelling within the site. It should be noted that the original submission detailed a larger dwelling on site with an attached garage. Following discussions with the case officer, a reduced design was put in for ourselves. The original plan detailed a footprint of 103 metres squared. The current plan before you details a house which is 79 metres squared within the site, and it should be noted that the total site area extends to some 500 metres squared. Next slide, please. These are the elevations. So the front elevation facing directly onto Woodland Road. The rear elevation would be facing onto the dwellings that are contained within Hazel Grove to the rear. Again, it should be noted that the original proposal that was submitted to ourselves, on the rear elevation, that there was 5 windows incorporated within the design. And following discussions with the applicant and the officers, this has now been reduced to 2 windows. 2 of the windows that have been removed would have serviced the main lounge and the master bedroom. The only windows that are now retained on the rear elevation would serve the kitchen area and an ensuite. Next slide, please. So this is the view looking east along Woodland Road. You have the houses in Woodland Road to the left. Hazel Grove is the white dwelling there. You can see there that's one of the dwellings within Hazel Grove, and the bare patch there is the gap site that was under consideration. Next slide, please. Again, that's just looking in the opposite direction along Woodland Road. Next slide, please. This is a view towards the site with Hazel Grove beyond. You will see I think it's number 5 Woodland Road to the left of that image, and along that boundary there is a public path which runs alongside that adjacent fence there. Next slide, please. This is within the site looking northwest. And the next slide, please. And this is a view of the path that would bound the actual dwelling cartilage. It should be noted that the original submission detailed a 1.8 metre fence that would go along the perimeter of the site, and adjacent to this path there was concerns over safety in this regard, and the agent has agreed to, if consent is granted, that the boundary fence would only measure 1 metre in height. Next slide, please. This is just a site section of how the site would be developed. To the left would be the 2-storey houses on Woodland Road, and to the right would be the dwellings contained within Hazel Grove. Whilst it is noted that there would be no direct line of sight to the lower elevation of the dwellings in Hazel Grove, there could be privacy issues and overlooking issues directly into the 2nd floor of the dwellings within Hazel Grove. windows were removed, as I've mentioned earlier, in the rear elevation, and the two glazed apertures remain in the design in the rear elevation, serving the kitchen and ensuite, and the glazed window within the pedestrian door, rear access door, which is proposed. The agent has now agreed that all three of these glazed apertures would be fitted with opaque glazing to mitigate any overlooking issues that may arise with the development. It's acknowledged that the site is modest. Scottish planning policy recognises the important contribution that infill sites can make to the housing supply and does provide support to residential development within settlements, given the opportunity they provide to make effective use of providing the existing infrastructure and service capacity and reduce energy consumption. Officers are therefore minded to find in favour of the application, and members are respectfully requested to approve it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Iona. Thanks for your presentation again. Members, questions for our case officer? It doesn't appear that there are any.
Chair, I've got a question, Chair.
Oh, Andrew, is it? Right, okay, bash on.
I'm just wanting to ask the officers about the building line, because this whole application appears to be beyond the building line.
Iona?
Certainly, it does sit slightly forward of the existing building line, but due to the nature of the site, it wasn't able to actually lie in confirmation with the existing building line. So yes, it does sit slightly forward, but not anything that was cause concern to officers.
Can I come back on that, Chair?
Certainly.
The whole building would sit in front of the building line. And I've seen applications in the past being thrown out for slightly over the building line. So I'm just wondering what the merit is here for approval, considering this.
Iona?
Because of the nature of Woodland Road, the existing built environment is in a curve, so there is no linear established building line there. And given that there is a gap site which could present itself as being acceptable in terms of building a dwelling, and the shortage of housing supply within Scotland, we considered that it would be acceptable in this instance to deviate from the established building line at Prissy.
Thanks, Iona. I had Jane and Ivor looking to speak, and they're both withdrawn. So unless there are other members looking to speak, somebody left a microphone on, I'm getting an echo.
James, anytime you're ready.
Councillor Sloan, yeah.
It was just to agree with Andrew yesterday on the certainly the sight line. There's also overdevelopment in this site. This was only a bit of waste ground, which already had been turned down because it was tight. The parking hasn't actually been designated where they'll find a space for the two parking places that they hope to find. I just don't think there's any consideration been given to the neighbours in this case, who one house is going to be, where the new house has been built, is right on top of the back door of the other house. It is a total intrusion. And I really think we should consider refusing this.
Tommy, that's fine, and I understand your point of view, but we're only at questions for the case officer at the moment, just to establish what the circumstances are. Then we're going to listen to the objectors, and then we will go into session, and I'll invite you back to make your point again at that stage. So we're currently only asking, thanks Tommy, we're only asking questions of the case officer at this moment in time.
Chair, could I ask a question, please, just for clarity? The road Hazel Grove, is that just a turning section and no proposal for house in that space there? I'm looking at the fancy shape they've got there backing onto Woodland Road as being this application site.
Iona will help you with that. Iona?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what, just how there's the site is a V-shape. There's a small strip, as you're looking at photographs, the main body of the house is directly in front of those dwellings there, and there's a small piece of amenity ground that follows down the boundary and follows the path down there, which would remain undeveloped, although a fence would go along that periphery there.
Thanks, Iona.
It's just, Chair, that I would have thought that the end of Hazel Grove would have been a more appropriate place for a house rather than sticking in that corner between the houses and Woodlands Road. But that's for me to think about.
Considering the application before us, Jock, we're not deciding on application sites.
Okay, Chair, sorry.
Councillor McComb.
Thank you, Chair. Iona, could you identify where number 1 Woodland Road actually is?
I presume it's number 1 Hazel Grove, sir, you're referring to, and that's the lower roof that you can see in that picture. Number 3 Hazel Grove is the 2-storey building that's to the right of that image, and it's attached to number 1 Hazel Grove, which is the single-storey building there.
Iona, on page 29, it refers to the front gable of 1 Woodlands Road. I've looked at the map and cannot actually find that property.
Iona.
Sorry, that must be a clerical error. It must be referring to 1 Hazel Grove. I'm just trying to find it on the actual in the committee report.
1.2.
1.2. Thank you, sir.
It's the very last paragraph, 1.2, Iona.
Sorry, I can't actually open a wider site plan just now, just to establish where 1 Woodland Road is.
Chair, I might be able to help. Number 1 Woodland Road is the wee shop that's on the corner there. You'll see it greyed out. It's around about a parking area. It's off the straight off of Craigley Avenue.
Chair, I think if members look at page 27 of their agenda papers, none of the slides here actually show it. It's you've got 3 and 5 Woodland Road, and Councillor Just is right. The property to you can see the greyed out one on page 27. That would be number 1.
Thank you for that information, David.
Okay, if that suits you, Jim, I've got Councillor Hislop looking to come in. Ivor, please.
Chair, it was just to say about the grade 1. I'm not needing in just now.
Thank you. Okay. So we're still in questions only for the case officer at this moment in time. Are there any other questions for the case officer? If not, we'll progress to the objectors. And again, this is a local application. We take representations that last 3 minutes. If Michael Hughes is with us, are you with us, Michael?
Yes, Chair, thank you.
Good stuff, Michael. You'll have 3 minutes to make a presentation. I'll remind you 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion. You've been kind enough to wait until members have an opportunity to ask you questions. I'd be grateful. And just whenever you're ready, sir, thank you.
Well, I'll start with a short history of the site. As all know it, I've been lived in this street for 35 years. Number 1, 3 and 5 Woodland Road pre-existed the Leafield development. The open space, which is the subject of this application, occupies the former site of Shucken Park's farmhouse and yard, which 1, 3 and 5 were in alignment with, and now forms the boundary of 1 and 3 Hazel Grove. Had the developers of Leafield not went into liquidation before completion, the subject, together with the paved area to the southwest, would have been offered to the local authority for adoption and future maintenance. However, this didn't happen, and as such fell into the ownership of private individuals. Therefore, the public footpath, as described, although used by pedestrians, is not owned or maintained by the council, but might be described as a right-of-way. Although not formally maintained, the open space formed a green lung in an otherwise built-up area and had several established trees and was enjoyed by all in the neighbourhood. The proposed development in its most recent incarnation still represents an overdevelopment grossly out of character with the local amenity. There are no neighbours who want to see a house built here, including many who have not objected, probably because the online process is complex and time-consuming for those like myself not inclined to use the internet, etc. I'm aware of 2 new occupants in the notifiable area who have not had the opportunity to raise their concerns. Does the Roads Department, I have to ask, does the Roads Department ever object to planning applications? Road safety concerns and parking are a concern of all the neighbours in our location. Most dwellings have off-road parking available, but come evening and overnight the roads become congested and dangerous due to vehicles parked on the street boundary, so that vehicles may be driven in, turned and driven out in a forward direction, with clear sight lines in each direction. This added considerable costs, but has proved immensely beneficial with regards to safety of road users and pedestrians. Surely this would be a sensible requirement for any new development in Woodland Road. In the application, there may be road parking space shown on the plan for 2 vehicles, but it would be tight and it would certainly not be discreet. I can ask just on behalf of the other neighbours who can't be with you, just to reiterate that they don't welcome this development. Thank you.
Thanks very much, sir. Very concise and very helpful. Thank you. Members, any questions for Mr. Hughes? It seems not. Mr. Hughes, thanks very much for being with us today. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. Now, members, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 representations, one from Mrs. Julie Hunter, one from Moira Knox, one from Mrs. McNally, and one from Mr. Perry. Tracy's going to read them out, and again, 3-minute limit, Tracy, in each of them, please. Just tell us which letter you're reading first, and then just bang on. Thanks very much, Tracy.
Thanks, Chair. First one is from Mrs. Hunter. My name is Mrs. Hunter and I currently reside at 18 Woodland Road, Stranraer. I cannot attend the meeting, but I would like my statement to be read out. The proposed plot of land is grassland, and this states on the original plans that is what is to be with trees and shrubs. The trees have been recently removed. The intended house is going to be directly across from my property. The road in between is narrow, which I feel is a loss of privacy, accessibility, which is required at all times due to my husband's condition. My husband has problems with sleeping throughout the day and at night, and the noise and disruption won't help matters. It's a lot of traffic congestion and building works. The pavement and road would become congested, causing a disruption for pedestrians and road traffic if the space is to hold 2 cars. The one behind would need to move first to allow the other car to move, which would be difficult if cars are already parked. The footpath is well used by all members of the general public, including the elderly, disabled and carers, to get access to a property. The property would be overlooking my property and others. The houses behind are below the intended property and will be looking straight into the houses due to the lack of space. There are houses currently being built over in the distance with lots of space for anybody wanting to build there, so why not there? I strongly object to the property being built and wish for the land to remain as grassland area, which is intended to be. The next statement is from Moira Knox. Loss of natural light from the 1.8 metre fences all round. This would be significant. I have concerns about future noise and ongoing lack of privacy if this bill proceeds. There are existing drainage pipes from the proposed construction site which currently empty into my garden. What are the future plans for these? Impact of construction due to my visual impairment. I must have unimpeded access to the entire path up to Woodland Road, the local shop and bus stop. So I need to know that no construction materials and or equipment will be put on the path. Also, how will my privacy be maintained during construction? Impact on the natural environment. The landowner has already needlessly cut down 4 trees, and I am very concerned that the remaining 4 on the narrow strip of land running down the side of my property do not suffer the same fate. Also, what does the owner have for this strip of land, and will they and future owners maintain it so it doesn't become overgrown and look unsightly? The next statement is from Mrs McNeely. I object to the building being built on the grounds for the following. 1, the building is too close to the pavement. The building is meant to have a build line where it is in line with all the current houses on the side that are built, which isn't in front of them. The plot of land, according to other plans, is a piece of grassland with trees and shrubs. The plans are wrong. The back fence is to be 10 metres away, and on the plans it's only 6 metres away. There will be issues with flooding, concerns with privacy due to being so close to other buildings at the back, but also they will be looking straight over into my house windows as well as other neighbours. There will be a blockage to the houses behind due to them being below, and therefore natural light will be no longer due to overshadowing, with the house being so close to them. The road is narrow, and this causes a concern for safety of others and other vehicles if there are cars already parked. So I do strongly object to any build. And the last statement is Mr Pirrie from 16 Woodland Road. The proposed building is not in line with other buildings on the side of the street. The new building will be a few feet from the pavement. The buildings Mr Hughes built are yards back from the same pavement. Mr Hughes had to adjust his building plans so that his building sat so far back. This, I believe, was so he could turn a car within his property so he could drive out into a forward gear. The new building does not. This would make one rule for one and another for the next. On the point of emerging, the road is narrow at approximately 5 metres. If a car is opposite the new driveway, the person driving would need to at least 2 cuts to emerge. This is at a curve in the road. This makes coming out more dangerous. If by chance a child walking along the pavement drops a ball, this could be a disaster. Remember, most people drive into a driveway, they don't reverse. This would therefore have to reverse out. This would even be more dangerous. The size of the plot, it is after studying these plans again, become more apparent of how much of a size the proposed building is. Over 50 feet long by 27 feet wide. It will nearly cover the whole of the front area of the plot. The western wall is in the plans at just over 6 metres from the kerb to the neighbour's fence at the south, and at the south is roughly the same. How would the new occupants get round that corner? While talking about the building, the back windows have been altered, one to the side, the other 2 now with opaque glass. The door with the same glass. This is obviously because of objections from Hazel Grove about privacy. My opinion is that they are quite right. There is a teenage girl in one of these, and are these people going to keep them closed permanently? As soon as any openings are opened, privacy disappears. The proposed house overshadows the 2 houses to the south, cutting natural light away. Seemingly the retaining wall does have drainage holes, but are they big enough to sustain a property so large? The building is too large for the size of the plot. It will be completely out of character with the rest of the street. It will in effect sink out a sore thumb. Remember how far out of line it is with established buildings. Some of the plans are wrong. Just taking the fountain plan and the summary, both dated on the 16th of November 2021. The top 2 measures in red show the inside larger than the outside. The summary still states that there's a garage attached. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Members, you know there are no questions on these representations, however we have heard them. Okay, we're now in session. I'll come back to Councillor Giusti and Councillor Sloan, and then I'll see if there are any other members wishing to speak. Andrew?
Thanks, Chair. I would suggest that we reject this application. I think I'll refer to what we've got in the refusal in the documents that we've got in front of us on 1.4. Well, when you go into item 1 on page 30, sorry. I think that is a big lump of building to build in such a small space. It's way in front of the build line that's already there. And I mean, it's a pretty obvious build line all the way from 1, 3 and 5. And to say that, well, it's a curved road, so there's no specific build line, you can see it on the opposite side of the road. There's a uniformity of it. I struggle with the idea of the privacy for number 3 and number 1 on Hazel Grove. There is a large drop, so any building here would actually be backing onto it. I've actually took a wee drive by the site last night, and I was kind of looking and I was getting a feel for it. And no matter what, you're going to be very close to other houses. You're going to be overwatching other houses and other back gardens with your own amenities that will be quite small. Like their own garden will be rather small. The whole aspect of turning in and getting a car in, etc., it's right on the crest of the bend. So the visuals aren't particularly great, especially when you're going to build a house directly next to your driveway. So your visuals aren't that great. When you look at number 3 and 5, and you consider the amount of room they've had to make to actually get cars in there and have a turning circle, I think you need to be consistent along the road here. So I would suggest that we perhaps go with the same recommendations as what are on page 30, item 1, and whatever the officers want to take from what I've just said. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks, Andrew. The only thing is officers don't take anything. You have to put forward a proposal that meets council policy, and the officers will tell us whether or no it's acceptable, although I understand exactly what you're saying. And if your proposal is simply because I'm presuming that you don't want Tracy or anyone else to write doing all the things you've just pointed out, if you're wanting to take what's in 1.4 on page 30 as your proposal, I'll see if Councillor Sloan agrees with that. I'll see if it's acceptable as a proposal, and I'll see if there's anything that other members wish to put forward. Councillor Sloan?
Chair, sorry, can I add to that? Can I add what you've just said there, plus the build line as being an aspect of it? Because I think that's a very important aspect of my refusal.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sloan, then Councillor Carruthers.
Yeah, Chair, well, you may be surprised to hear that I actually agree with Andrew on this when we did go on a site visit and took the time to go and see just how tight this is. I mean, we're talking shoehorns here to get this footprint onto this site. And it's what that takes away from the others round about. There is already planning permission for an estate at the back of these houses, which was stopped, I think, by the Robinsons and Davidson failure. But there's still the planning permissions there, and they will go ahead. And it is going to make that site really, really, really overcrowded. I believe when Robert Duncan looked at it, he swithered on what side to come down on, approve or disapprove. And I believe that's the truth. So maybe Robert could be asked that question. Thank you.
So just before you go, Councillor Sloan, are you requesting a site visit, or is that simply an observation?
Sorry, Chair, say again.
You did mention during your presentation you wanted a site visit. Are you asking for a site visit, or were you just making that as a point?
No, I live 30 yards from it. Well.
Okay. So you're not asking for a site visit?
No, I've already had one.
Right. Okay, Councillor Carruthers.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at this from the perspective, and I'm in support of what Andrew's Councillor Justice proposed, and I think maybe Thomas seconded. But I'm looking at the access for this. So it is easy to see. We've got a location plan, but I've got it on Google Maps as well. So it is access on Woodland Road. So Woodland Road is the reference, and Andrew's right when he says that it refers to the previous building line. It sits in front of the building line, and if the access is to come from Woodland Road, as it would need to, I think in this case, then it's completely out of sync with the rest of the character of the local area. it does increase the density compared to Woodland Road, certainly the same side of the road. So for the reasons Andrew's outlined, and it's in 1.4 as you've referred to, I think, on page 30, but I would be entirely that this should be refused. It is in the wrong place. It's fair enough. It's somebody being opportunistic, and I understand that, but I would certainly support the reasons for refusal as Andrew's outlined.
Okay. Jane Maitland has asked if we have an officer advice on building line issues, and I think Iona already stated that given that this was on a curve, she felt that there wasn't a linear building line. I'm sure that was her language. But Iona, can you just come back to us again, please, before Councillor McComb comes in and provide us advice on the observations on building line?
Yes, thank you. I acknowledge that there's more uniformity on the houses pertaining to Woodland Road, the opposite side of the street, but any of the built environment on the side of the street that we're now discussing, the same uniformity isn't there. So we considered that this may be acceptable, although it was in excess of the building line, the established building line of the two dwellings that were already there in regards to number 3 and 5 Woodland Road. But it is in front of it. There is no doubt that it breaks the established building line in context with the adjacent dwellings to number 3 and 5. But if you continue down Woodland Road, on the same side, the uniformity of the building line is broken due to the curvature of the street. So that is why we thought it was acceptable in this instance.
That's great, Iona. Thanks very much. I'm sure that explanation will satisfy Councillor Maitland. Councillor McComb, please.
Thank you, Chair. The proposal would produce an outlier from the building line. The entire building proposed would be beyond the building line. And looking at the map I have in front of me, the building line is not simply the shop 3 and 5 Woodland Road, but to a large degree is 1 and 3 of Hazel Grove as well. So you have an established building line there. I cannot see how this proposal would be acceptable in terms of building line. You would also have concerns over visibility. You're on the inside of a bend. We had talk earlier on of a 1.8 metre fence being reduced in height. Well, the neighbours would be quite within their rights to have 1.8 metre fences as well, that visibility on the inside of that bend is very, very limited. I would therefore be prepared to support Andrew's proposal, Andrew's motion.
Thank you, Jim. Well, in that case, we have a motion and a second. A motion by Andrew and seconded by Tommy. So it's Councillor Giusti and Sloan that we refuse this application using the text on the top of page 30 of our report, which is part of 1.4. And add in, I think Andrew asked for the building line to be added in as part of that recommendation for refusal. David Sutty wants to speak to us. David, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, heard what members are saying. The only thing I would suggest, if you look on page 30 for the previous reasons of refusal, don't forget the previous property proposed was a 2-storey semi-detached property. So the specific reasons for that 2-storey property included the mass, scale and height. Because this is a single-storey property, that the element of the height, I think, has been reduced here in terms of the impact. So that might be something you wish to consider. There is mention, obviously, about not in accordance with the density, character and pattern of the area. That would probably be the point, if members were minded to refuse it, that you insert, including the building line. Thanks, Chair.
That's really helpful. Thanks for that, David. And that's quite useful. Mass scale and height would not be a factor anymore. Andrew, are you quite content to have that reworded according to the observations of David Suttey?
Yes, Chair, but I think mass and scale are still appropriate, just maybe not height. I think the mass and scale of that application on that site is still rather large, but I agree with the height.
It's your motion. You just want to remove height and leave everything else in and then add a building line. Is that what you're asking?
Yes, please.
Councillor Sloan, are you content with that amended version?
Yes, Chair, thanks.
Thanks very much, Tracy. If there are no alternative views from members, then that will be the decision of this committee. Okay, that's the decision of this committee. Tracy, can you confirm that we've refused this planning application and on the grounds set out on page 30 an add-on building line? And just remind members what the language is, please, before we move on.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So members have agreed to refuse the application on the grounds that it is contrary to local to plan development plan policies OP1 and OP2 and related guidance, and that's by reasons of its mass, scale and positioning within the site, close proximity to 1 and 3 Hazel Grove, density and limited private garden area, would represent overdevelopment of the site in a manner uncharacteristic and not in accordance with the density, character and pattern of the area, including being in excess of the building line, and would be oppressive and significant detrimental to the residential area of 1 and 3 Hazel Grove. That's it, Chair.
I think that's very good, Tracy. If members are content with that, we'll move on. I don't see anything to the contrary, so thanks, Iona, for being with us today. We move on to agenda item number 6, an application for the erection of agricultural building for dairy unit and underground slatted slurry tank, formation of hard standing areas and access roads, installation of sewage treatment plant, and formation of drainage swale and associated groundworks at Slagnaw Farm, Kelton, Castle Douglas. It's a full planning permission application. The reference number is 21/1930/full. Recommendations approved subject conditions, and the case officer is Claire Eckstein. So, Claire, are you with us today?
I am. Thank you, Chair.
Good afternoon, Claire. Just take us through your presentation when you're ready, please.
Thank you. If you could just, so obviously the application is as stated on the screen here. The application relates to Slagnaw Farm, which lies on the eastern side of the U155S, which is 1.1 kilometres south of Roanhouse. Next one. So this shows the application site, and the plan to the left is where the orange area is where there's a pipeline, gas pipeline. So there's a restriction zone on any development within that area. And the plan to the right shows the application site and also the area that's in the ownership of the applicant, which you'll note that the actual farm itself unit doesn't extend into Roanhouse village, which had been raised as an issue by one of the representations. Next. So the proposal itself is for an agricultural building. So it's a two-span ridge structure, which is approximately 80 metres by 42 metres. And the heights of the ridges vary between 7.3 and 8.4. As you can see, there's an existing cubicle shed, which is also on the plan here on the left and the second drawing down. That's of the similar height to the lower span building. Next. So this shows a block plan of the shed itself. There's a robotic milking unit, which is a circular area within the building. Obviously, there's a sort of slatted holding area, and then there's cubicles sheds proposed for cattle. The existing cattle shed is in the grey shaded rectangle you can see at the bottom of the plan. Next. So this is a close-up which shows the north end of the building, which shows the robotic dairy unit, milking unit with all the associated plant with it. And next, this is from the other side, which shows the sort of cattle collecting area and obviously the slurry collection, which then goes into an underground tank. Next. And they're also proposing to put in a drainage swale, which will just be in the field just to the east of the proposed new building. Next. So this is taken from the existing northern entrance to the site. So the application is to the left of the existing cattle building. So the red car is parked on the application site itself, which is parked on the raised ground. As you can see, the application is retrospective because they've already undertaken groundworks. Next. Lost Fiona. Oh. Yeah. So this is that's better, thank you. So this is actually looking at the northern boundary of the site with the car parked on the raised ground. Next, and then this is looking back along the public road from the site entrance, so this is looking sort of northwards. Next. And then this is looking at the existing shed. We've got the existing site entrance, and you can see the land's been raised up to its level with the existing proposal. And then this is looking southwards along the public road, and this shows the existing sheds. These existing sheds in total create a sort of frontage of approximately 210 metres. Next. So this is showing a close-up of the existing shed which fronts along the road, and you can see that there's sort of lights within the building itself, and obviously the cattle are within the building. Next. So this is from the northern boundary, so this is looking back down towards the site entrance and onto the public road. And so this is me just panning left from that camera position, so and showing the previous shed, and then panning left again, and you can see the slurry tank at the back there. Next, and then this is me again, and you can see how they've raised the ground and sloped it down, but obviously the groundworks haven't been completed yet. Next. So this is sitting at the north sort of eastern corner, so you can see how the ground slopes down. They've raised it, but obviously that's not the 1 in 3 slope which they're showing on the plan, so there's still works to be undertaken. So I'm just panning around, showing the existing shed, and again, next, and then this is the again from the previous photograph. And final, next one. So this is showing along the eastern boundary, and the swale will be in the field area, just to the left of the fence. And next. So, as you can tell, that the proposed unit is for a new expansion of the existing dairy unit. Which is set out, if you look in paragraph 3.3, it indicates that the intention is to increase the amount of cattle at the site, so approximately 100 from the 570 dairy cows at the moment and another 50, which has approximately 350 of young stock. So it's about an increase of 17.5%. And there's also the associated slurry tank and drainage swales to deal with the SEPA regulatory requirements. So as you can see from as you saw from the site photographs, the ground level works have been commenced. So we have asked for some additional landscaping condition, which is set out in number 1. But obviously we have tweaked this and also just so that we do get something in. We obviously recognise that works have commenced, so we've asked for it to be and no further development to be undertaken until above foundation level, until we get this amended landscaping scheme in. But the applicant has indicated that they would be happy to undertake additional landscaping on the site, hence the condition. So, as noted in the report, the recommendation is to approve the application subject to conditions noted. Members should note that the applicant's agent is speaking later, so if they have any specific technical questions, then they may wish to ask at that stage. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire. I have one for you, and it's not that technical. The second part, in fact, the last paragraph on 1.3 on page 40, it's just a typo, a typographical error. I presume in the very last line, they don't have scrapped passages to the proposed slatted tank. They'll have scraped passages, is that right?
Yes, I would agree with that, sorry.
Thanks, Claire.
Google spell check, I think.
Thanks, Claire. Okay, members, any questions for the case officer? I don't see anyone at present. So we have two speakers. We have David Mayer, the agent, and Kenneth Campbell, the applicant. And I see one gentleman there. Are you David or Kenneth?
I'm Kenneth.
Okay, so you're going to speak first, because according to our speakers list, David Mayer speaks first and then you speak after him. Is David with us?
Yes, I'm here. I was more just here to answer any technical questions that anybody had rather than actually speak.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, that's super. So you get 3 minutes shared between you. So just, gentlemen, whenever you're ready, I will remind you with 30 seconds to go to draw your presentation to a conclusion. And if you have any further questions from members, I'd be grateful if you'd wait just in case they have questions. Sorry?
Sorry, Chair. I think Jane Maitland might want to come in before we go to the speakers.
Oh, okay. She wanted to ask questions of the case officer. Just hold on a minute, gentlemen, please. Jane, you want to come in?
Chairman, I did stick in yes, but I'm ahead. Look, it doesn't actually matter. I'm sure this will be teased out. It's about lighting in particular, but we'll tease it out through the applicant and agent's presentation.
Okay, if you're content with that, Councillor Maitland. Right, okay, gentlemen, whenever you're ready, you've got 3 minutes. I will remind you with 30 seconds to go to draw a presentation to a conclusion. And then if you'd be kind enough to wait in case, well, Councillor Maitland has an issue about lighting anyway, so we'll need to speak to one of you in relation to that. So whenever you're ready, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I really just want to set the scene from my point of view. The main aim of this project is to replace an aged and inefficient milking parlour with a fast modern parlour to make Slagnall Farming Limited an employer of choice. Staff procurement is possibly my biggest challenge, and we need to be an attractive proposition for prospective staff going forward with short milking times in a pleasant environment. Sustainability is and will continue to be a cornerstone of this business. It's my firm belief that going forward, cow numbers should match acres available on the farm, on any farm. Expanding to the extent of hauling silage and slurry around the stewartry is high-cost farming that is complicated to manage with increased milking times for staff. This is exactly the scenario I wish to avoid now and in the future. I believe legislation regarding phosphate and nitrogen levels in soil, similar to that in the Netherlands and New Zealand, will come to the UK soon, which will effectively act as a quota on milk production per acre. The extra 100 cows in this plan will help finance the project for me. I'm lucky enough to have 825 acres available to me in a ring fence, which will perfectly be utilised by 670 cows and associated young stock without any extra tractor traffic through Roan House. tractor traffic through the local villages from Slagnaw is minimal at present. My main aim is not to milk 1,000 cows, it's to run a simple, efficient and sustainable business, which lost my place, which creates minimum stress for me and my family, and to have gold standard levels of welfare for my cows and my staff. I'm proud of the fact that this morning 5 children have left the houses and cottages of Slagnaw to attend local schools. There have been children going to the local schools from Slagnaw since long before I was born, and hopefully this will be the same for decades to come. But this can only be a reality if I can continue to run a well-invested and dynamic business. I've lived in Rowan House all my life and wish to respect and be respected by my fellow Kelton residents. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks very much, Mr. Campbell. Mr. Mayor, if you have nothing to add, we'll go to questions.
No, I have nothing to add at this stage.
Thank you. I did have Jane Maitland ask about lighting, so I'll invite Jane Maitland first and then Councillor John Young. Councillor Maitland.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Mr. Campbell, Mr. Mayor, I understand exactly where you're coming from with respect to the business and development. Nevertheless, you've got to live in harmony with your neighbours. I think they will be reassured about what you're talking about with respect to traffic and extra haulage of fodder and silage and concentrates and slurry, etc., not being the issue here. Nevertheless, it has come through that people are anxious about the physical presence of basically what is a huge building. And it sits up as well, well up, which we can see. And in fact, in many ways, because you've started the works, it is absolutely obvious just exactly how high this will be. Looking at what you've got already with respect to lighting, you have got lighting along the outside of the building, underneath the eaves, where the beasts feed along the sides. And I think probably people might be worried about the level of light spillage because of it being up and under. Could you possibly tell us whether or not it would be possible to cowl the lighting, make certain that there isn't outside spillage? We're being told by our officers that we cannot dictate to you what you do, but in the interests of being good to your neighbours, could we have some level of assurance that this will be something that will be taken into account, please?
Yeah, okay. On the new building, the north side and the east side, which are the most visible from the Rowan House side, or the approach to Slagnaw, will be fully cladded, so there should be no light pollution from the new building from the Rowan House side. The only open side of the new building will face onto the existing building. So in essence, the new building actually will, to a certain degree, screen the lighting we have at present from the village. Not entirely, but it will go some distance to screening the existing lighting from that side. And I would add that the lights are switched off at 9 o'clock. They automatically go off at 9 o'clock every night.
That's helpful to be reassured about that. And that will be the same with what you're doing at the moment. They all go off.
They will. No, the new shed will be, well, it will be completely clad on all the out-facing aspects, and they will be switched off after milking, which should be 6 o'clock at night.
Thanks, Mr. Campbell. Thanks, Jane. Councillor John Young, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Campbell, for your presentation. Animal movements. Could you tell me, Mr. Campbell, if the cows will be permanently kept in this shed for 12 months a year, or will they be let out sometimes? And secondly, I'm well aware that animal welfare is not part of planning conditions. Could you tell me roughly the life of a dairy cow which is kept under these conditions? I was brought up in a croft in the West Highlands and we kept cows 15, 20 years. What's the life of a cow kept under your dairy conditions, Mr. Campbell?
We historically or recently have reintroduced grazing of dairy cows at Slagnall. We're not housed 365 days a year. For the last 3 years, 50% of the cows will go out night and day for 6 months, at least 6 months of the year. And dry cows are outside in the summertime. So I would suggest that over the course of a year, considerably over 50% of the herd will be out for a meaningful length of the summer. As far as the life of a dairy cow is concerned, that will be, I would think I would compare favourably with my peers, and it will depend on what kind of system you run. It will be a good bit less than 10 years that you would have with beef cows in a croft. I don't have the figure at the tip of my tongue, but I would think it will be about 5 years on average.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell.
Thanks, John. Are there any other questions for the applicant or his agent? In that case, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Mayor, thanks very much for being with us today. Thanks for your presentation and your positive responses. Thanks very much. Members are now in session. If there are no proposals, we go with the officer's recommendation. Oh, I've got John Campbell looking to speak. Councillor Campbell.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I was just looking on page 45. I know in the report that they didn't get any response from SEPA, but on page 45, the drainage and water pollution, my particular attention was drawn to the advisory directive that can be added. I would like us to consider to add that, if that's possible. Just for the concerns that they've not had a response from SEPA. I know SEPA's been having problems with their what is it? Their system or something that
their IT has been compromised.
Yeah,
and they're rebuilding their system.
Yeah. So I would like us to consider that we put this advisory directive into the conditions, if that's possible, Chair.
Okay, I've got a couple of other speakers, Councillor Campbell. Then we'll come back and check with either Claire or David on your proposal. Thanks, John. I've got Councillor Young and then Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks, Chair. I'll wait till after the other speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Young. Councillor Dryborough.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'm just on your point before the speakers came in. I was going to go ahead with the recommendations as such, but I'm happy to hear if there's any advice on SEPA, which I'm sure SEPA would put in place anyway, but thanks.
Thanks, Archie. Okay. Claire or David, Councillor Campbell suggested a directive on the basis that we didn't receive a response. And it's not a criticism of SEPA. They're in dire straits at the moment with their IT systems. So either Claire or David on a directive, please. Then I've got Jane Maitland wanting to speak, and then I'll come back to Archie, and then John Young wants to speak last. David, thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, we would have been attaching that directive anyway. It doesn't override the fact that the applicant here will need to go to SEPA to get the usual CARS regs approval from them directly. So basically, in planning terms, we're quite happy to attach a directive just reminding them of that obligation. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much. That's satisfied Councillor Campbell. Hopefully that'll suit Councillor Dryborough. Councillor Maitland, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. It's just a question really to the officers about the definition of completion. The scheme of planting is only going to be implemented in the first planting season after completion of the building. And I just wondered about how do we define completion? Because I think some level of softening, you'll never hide something like this, and nobody's expecting to be able to, but there's an opportunity to improve the amenity around about it. And I'm very glad to see that that's been taken on board by the applicant. But I'd just like to know and be sure about completion.
Would it be more helpful, Councillor Maitland, if we placed as part of the condition that planting is carried out no later than spring 2023, which gives them a year and a half?
If, Chairman, that is reasonable, by all means.
Okay, we'll check with that as well with David. So, Councillor Young and Councillor Dryborough, yeah, Archie, I'll come to you, John Young, last because he asked to be last. Archie, are you content with the proposal, including the directive from David, and if it's acceptable, a proposal that we condition the planting season to be no later than spring 2023?
Yes, I'm happy with that, Chair, if the officers are happy with it.
Thanks very much, Archie. Okay, John Young, last word for you.
Thanks, Chair. I just would like to abstain from this vote as a matter of conscience. Thank you, Chair.
Say that again, John, please.
Have we approved this application, Chair, yet?
No. We are discussing, there doesn't seem to be an appetite to refuse it. So we're discussing what conditions we might add that will satisfy the points members have raised.
Thank you, Chair, for the clarification. No, I'm aware that animal welfare doesn't form part of any planning considerations, but as a matter of conscience, can I note that I am abstaining from any vote in this?
Thanks. I'm sure I'll check with Tracy, but I'm sure that's an acceptable position. So, David Sutty, if we approve this application today with a directive attached for the SEPA requirements and add to the condition about planting that it shall happen no later than spring 2023, are these acceptable and reasonable conditions to add?
Chair, no problem with the directive, as I've already advised. The only issue I'd say here by completion, our interpretation is that the building is actively being brought into use. There's never any ambiguity that a building is actively in use. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to have a completion certificate from building standards. Really, it'd be self-evident to any planning inspector going out that the use was taking place, and if the planting hadn't gone in, that could then be chased up as a breach of condition. If you set a special time limit on saying by a certain date, given that the permission basically there might be delays in the actual implementation of the building, and therefore the completion might be considerably after. I'm just thinking of where we've had all the COVID situations where some building works have had to cease. I'm hesitant to actually have a specific date on it, because once that date is passed, you're then going into a situation of how do you actually satisfy that condition, because you can't go back in time and do it. I'm far happier using the existing wording on the understanding it means it's brought into use. Again, Laura might be able to advise otherwise.
No, that's fine. If what you're saying is, because that's what I was going through my mind, completion and brought into use are two different languages for the same thing. So being brought into use means it's being used, then that would do. We wouldn't need to add a time limit. That would be self-satisfying. I see Councillor Maitland has also asked about an archaeology directive, and Councillor Crothers wants to speak. So I'm happy to abandon the thoughts that I had on the basis that brought into use would be fine for the planting season. I'll give you time to reflect on the archaeology directive and see what Councillor Crothers has to say. Councillor Crothers, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just be very brief. Just in regards to the statement that John's come out with as a matter of conscience, I think it's quite right to bring that point up, but we haven't went to a vote. So is that a declarable interest? I just think it has to be recorded in the right way. If people have that view, if members have that view and they want to remain away from the decision making, so to speak, and distance themselves because of their own feelings towards a particular subject matter, being animal welfare, I think it has to be reflected in the right way, Chair. I just wonder, could it take guidance in regards to that, because we didn't go to a vote.
No, that's if you reflect on what I said, Ian, that's exactly what I said. I'd ask Tracy's advice after our discussion, because there does appear to be an appetite to support this. So that was I haven't got to that stage yet, but thanks for reminding me. And David City has replied, there's also an archaeology directive, Jane Maitland, as per 2.5 in the conditions. So it would appear that we're getting to a decision now whereby we're supporting this application and on the inclusion of an archaeology directive and a SEPA directive. The brought into use of the new building triggers the planting season. And I hadn't got to ask Tracy, but I'll ask Tracy now. Is there a way Councillor Young can record his not wishing to participate in the debate on the basis that his principled position is that it's about animal welfare?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I note that Councillor John Young is not declaring an interest. However, he has got issues around the animal welfare, but he has participated in the discussion at the start of this item. And if we don't proceed to a vote, there wouldn't be the option for him to abstain at that point, which any member can do when we get to a vote. If Councillor Young wants it minuted, we can come up with a form of wording that Councillor Young decided to remove himself from any decision process due to animal welfare as part of the minute.
Yeah, that'd be really helpful, Tracy. Aye.
Yeah. Okay, we can do that.
Councillor Clark, is that a legacy hand, or do you want to come back in? Ian? Hopefully Ian will come back and join us. On the basis then that there does not seem to be any proposal to reject this application, Tracy, can you remind members what has been debated and what the likely language is? And if I don't hear any dissent, we'll take it that's what the recommendation, or that's what the decision will be.
Yes, members have agreed to approve the application subject to the conditions in the report, which also includes to add 2 directives. One is regarding complying with SEPA's regulations, and another one is the council archaeologist. Any features or objects of archaeologist interest come to light as a result of ground disturbance resulting from the works should be notified to the council archaeologists so they can be recovered and recorded in line with National Historic Environment policies and the requirements of Law of Treasury Trove in Scotland.
Thanks very much, Tracy, and we'll rely on you to reflect in a minute the fact that John Young did not wish to participate had a vote taken place on the basis of a principled position. Okay, members, that's that agenda item agreed. We move on to agenda item number 7. An application for the erection of 89 number dwelling houses, formation of vehicular access roads, car parking spaces, footpaths and areas of open space and landscaping, and amendments to road junction with A701, which is a trunk road. Approval of matters specified in conditions 2 and 3, which is layout. 4, design. 5, external appearance. 6, landscaping of planning permission principle 20/1963/S42 in relation to the part of the site on the eastern side of the A701 Trunk Road Public Road at Curry European Transport Site, Edinburgh Road, Lochabriggs, Dumfries. Before I say any more, Councillor Dryburgh wants clarification. Archie?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And it's actually on this application. It's got the applicant down as Dumfries and Galloway Housing Association. I'm presuming it's Dumfries and Galloway Housing Partnership.
Yes, David Sutty did say that somehow, or Chris had said somehow that had slipped through, but it will be rectified in the committee report. So I apologise for that. Maybe should have said that at the outset. So this is an application for approval of matters specified in condition. The applicant, as Councillor Driver has noted, is Dumfries and Galloway Housing Partnership. The reference number is 21/1753/ARC. The recommendation is to approve subject conditions, and the case officer is Chris McTeer. Chris, if there are any other clarifications on the report, please do it now.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Driver, for picking up on that. That was the first of my verbal updates for this particular application. So yes, it was meant to be Dumfries and Galloway Housing Partnership. Just two further points to make on this regarding the proposed conditions. We are proposing a couple of relatively minor changes to these, and the situation came around after the papers went in for printing. So the first part is on, I think it's page 64 of your committee papers. It's in relation to condition 10 in part B. Following revised comments from my colleagues in roads planning, there's a reduction in the visibility splay required by condition 10B from 43 metres to 25 metres. That was taking into account the 20 mile an hour speed limit that's going to be proposed in the site. The other amendment that we're looking to make is to condition 1 of the approval. It's to extend the second from last sentence, and there's a form of words I'll quickly read out. So where the condition says a timescale for delivery in comparison with other residential units within the site, would like to add in, and the mechanism for addressing any developer contribution payable for education purposes applicable at that time. Now, I appreciate there might be some discussion about this later on, but I suppose the reasoning for our looking to amend this condition might become clear, and it was sort of through discussions with David and the council solicitor as well. But this obviously took place after the papers went in for printing. So I'll leave those there just now, and I'll move on with the presentation. So, as ever, the application is in front of members today by virtue of being major development under the hierarchy of development regulations. Thanks, Fiona, for putting the plan up there for me. So, going back slightly, the application site that we're looking at here had outline or planning permission in principle back in 2016 for a mixed-use site. Now, this site was on both sides of the road, so we've got the red line boundary there, but also the outstanding PIP has an area to the left of the road as well, and that application was subject to a Section 42 application in 2020, which members might remember seeing at committee last year. So the application that we're looking at today is an approval of matters specified in conditions. So it's not a full application. This is the further detail as set out in the application description. So we're looking principally at the further details required on layout, design, external appearances, landscaping, etc. So if I can go to the next slide, please. The application site, as you saw in the plan there, is to the east of the A701 trunk road in Locker Briggs and extends to about 3.5 hectares in size and is the site of a former lorry park. It's also an allocated housing site within LDP2. It's allocated as site H8, which along with the site to the east at Catherine Field Farm is designated as H205. And overall, both these sites are allocated for 374 housing units up until 2029. So this is the existing site access from the south. So the A701 is just to the left of the picture there, and the proposed new site entrance would be further to the right of the photograph there. If we can go to the next slide, please. The new access will be in on the left here. So that's the road down to Catherine Field Farm as it stands just now. And the next slide. Just again, this just shows the extent of the site as exists. And so as you can see, there's it's a vacant site at present. And the next slide will be showing the site boundary from the A701. So this is the sort of the looking from the east. This is the site's western boundary, although just the parcel of land that we're looking at for housing just now. So if we can move on to the next slide, should be the site layout. Now I'll zoom in on a couple of areas of detail for this. So this just kind of shows the overall site layout at a slightly larger scale. The development is laid out mainly around a series of interconnected courts leading off a new central road, which you can see running from the south of the site there. So looking at a bit more detail, next slide, please, Fiona. So this is the sort of the bottom corner of the site, looking at the proposed new roads junction. You've also got the suds area there. So this kind of shows in a little bit more detail the sort of the courtyard arrangement, the parking arrangements where we've got areas of planting, open space, green space, which is spread throughout the development. The houses are orientated in such a way that the sort of the parking courtyards are to the rear of the houses, and the fronts of the houses face across sort of footpaths and part of what we would call the sort of the green network for the site. So there's a couple of pictures later on just to demonstrate that particular point. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So this is just this is taken from the design and access statement that came in with the application. So it's just to give an overview of what one of the typical courtyards would look like. So it's as you can see, there's a mixture of parking and planting. And different types of material to be used. So it's not asphalt as such. We're looking at sort of different types of block paving for these areas. Next slide, please, which should be the layout of the site to the north. Again, this is just showing the areas of open space and green space and additional planting within the site. So you can see that the main road itself, and it's kind of evident where it comes in from the bottom of the picture. We're looking at a sort of designing streets layout where we have kind of sort of physical aspects. So you can see there's build outs in the road there, and that's to introduce a sort of natural traffic calming as well. Also where it sort of exits, there's almost an uncertainty where you come through where the road goes, and that's a sort of natural way to keep traffic speeds down as you work out which way you're going with the car as such. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of what we're calling the sort of the green routes through the site. This is an example of house frontages and the little bit of side elevation to the right there. So when we talk about green routes, it's footpaths where you sort of blur the boundaries between where the footpaths and where the sort of the planting areas and things are with that. Next slide. So we're looking at some of the detail of the actual builds in the house, because that was one of the details required in the previous PIP. Now, as noted in my report, there's a sort of palette of 3 different sort of colour schemes depending on the house type. These were these came around through the design process, obviously the architects brought to us, and they were based on colours and finishes of houses and buildings in the sort of wider local area. So there's 3 different palettes, colour palettes, if you will, and there's the quarry, urban, and farm. They're noted in the report as well. And depending on the house type, depends on the style of the finish. So block A is just a little detail. This is a 2-storey semi-detached block. The next slide, please. We are proposing some 3-storey housing in here, so this is a bit more detail from that. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the next one, I think it should be a terraced block, yeah. Next, block G detail. So as you can see, there's a mix of different house types within this, which is something that we expect to see nowadays. A good mix of different house types mixed in with layout and landscaping to create a sense of place. So this is just a sort of wider landscaping proposal. So you can see predominantly where the green space, the trees, and the additional planting are. We do have a detailed landscaping scheme with the application, which does form part of it. And that concludes where we are just now. The application is recommended for approval, subject to 1 or 2 other conditions, which again I noted the changes that we are looking to make to this. So for the reasons outlined in my report, I recommend that that this application is approved, and I'm happy to answer any questions as ever. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Chris. We'll go to questions for the case officer. Before we do, in the chat function, Tracy has put in the proposed changes to condition 1, and the amendments are highlighted in red for members to see. It's to try and protect the council in the event of the land not being used for social housing. And currently this council has a policy that we don't charge for educational purposes if the construction is a registered social landlord, such as Dumfries and Galloway Housing Partnership is. Okay, I've got Councillor Hislop and then Councillor Driver, I think, in that order. Councillor Hislop, please.
Chair, it's with regard to condition 1, a couple of clarifications for myself, please. Now, within the affordable housing paragraphs, is it 4.33, it says that the registered social landlord, provided the scheme is implemented by them, there's no requirement for affordable housing. And if you look at under developer contributions, there's no requirement for a social affordable housing. Therefore, do they have to pay contributions? Because it says within the supplementary guidance, if it's on affordable housing units, you need to pay it. But this says that there's no requirement for affordable housing because it's a social landlord. So if the social landlord builds them out as a private developer, does he need to pay for the schooling part of the contribution? And if he builds them out as a private developer rather than the social landlord, without any government subsidy, does he have to then have 20% affordable housing within the development, or is he exempt from that as a social landlord?
I'll leave Chris to answer that, but I would have thought social housing, by the very nature, would all be affordable. Chris, can you answer Ivor's question, please?
Yeah, just to pick up on that point, Chair. Yes, a registered social landlord is providing 100% affordable housing, so it's the 20% requirement doesn't fall in with that. So we do put the condition 1 we have in place on the off chance that the site is sold on. Now, it's my understanding, and we have just within the last day or so had quite rough discussions between David Sutty and Jamie Little, as well as Laura Whitelaw. Now, Jamie's the strategic housing officer for the council, and I understand that it's almost impossible for a registered social landlord to sell a site on, with this permission in place. I do believe it is very, very difficult to do that. So, but we do add condition 1 in just on the off chance that this situation does arise, and obviously we want to try and protect the interests of the council as well.
Ivor,
I'm not arguing about the selling on. If DGHP decides not to accept government subsidy and builds this out itself to sell for profit for these houses, do they come under private housing or still under registered social landlord? If they decide that's their business model, rather than go down social housing, we're just going to build them and sell them on. And they haven't taken government subsidy for affordable housing, do they need to then actually contribute to the schooling and the affordable housing part?
Laura wants to come in maybe to help Chris out here, but as I understand it, then the 20% would come in and they would need to pay the remainder as a contribution for education. But Laura's the person to give this particular advice and know me. Laura, can you help Councillor Hislop, please?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Hislop, would I be right in thinking that your concern is that condition 1 maybe doesn't go far enough in that situation? Because the way that it is currently phrased is that in the event the developer of the proposed housing unit is hereby approved is not a registered social landlord, and the scenario that you have thought of is it could still be a registered social landlord that develops it, but then they choose not to operate it as affordable housing. Is that the situation you're thinking of? Yeah, you're nodding your head. Sorry, I had my eyes on my other screen there. Yes, I can see where the wording doesn't capture that. My understanding is that that is a very, very remote possibility, but we could come up with additional wording again, which I can work on while the rest of the debate goes on, which could clarify that it's not only that the developer is not a registered social landlord, but that the development is not a 100%. You're nodding your head. So I will take that away and work on that while the rest of the debate goes on.
Thanks for that, Laura. Thanks, Ivor. Good to see you're on the ball, Ivor. I've now got Councillor Drybrough, Councillor Campbell and Councillor Maitland in that order. Archie, please.
Yeah, I think what Laura said there just covered the biggest part of my point there, Chair, and obviously DGHP have a business model at the moment which requires the subsidy for the government, and we do that through the strategic housing improvement strategy plan, and that gets funded through the other council Economy and Resources Committee actually that does that suggestion. So I'm pretty pleased that Laura came with that. It covered the point I was suggesting. I was going to mention, and therefore I'm happy with that response, Chair.
Thanks very much, Archie. John Campbell, please. Councillor Campbell.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's just to ask Chris if we could have the previous slide up with the last slide that showed the south west. Yeah, that particular one. Just out at the bottom there where the junction is, I mean, is that the existing junction? Because I'm looking at the outline on page 49. It seems to dip down at that corner, which takes in that particular junction. Is that the existing junction, or will that be a junction just further up? You know, when you come into Heath Hall, just where the old police station used to be, I think it's a veterinaries now.
Chris?
Yeah, that's the actual junction from the A701 it's not changing. It's still there. There's no changes to that. Where you can see, and it looks like a sort of footpath or cycleway coming out. That probably, you know, the point that's coming out probably roughly equates to where the existing access is just now that you saw in the photographs at the beginning of the presentation. Obviously, you can see there's an entirely new access for the site proposed further along the road towards Catherine Field Farm.
Right, I've got you. So that bottom curve where the footpath that you're just saying and the suds are, that's roughly where the gates are at the moment that you get access into that site.
Yeah, more or less. Where you turn into the junction and you would turn sort of in front of the old police station, the access is pretty much on your left-hand side, and that's you know, pretty much where that footpath is going to be coming out.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, John. I've got Councillor Maitland and Councillor Lever. Jane Maitland, please.
Chairman, it's a design issue, again, and thinking about the orientation of these houses. Chris, can you please talk to me about what you mean by the way the houses face? These courtyard arrangements, which I understand, all the mock-ups in the background information very carefully show one maximum car, you know, in these attractive-looking mock-ups. And I'm a bit concerned that what we are creating is 3 or 4 car parks with surrounding houses. But if you could explain to me what you mean about the main access being across paths, I mean, that just doesn't work. We've seen it in Kukubri, where they carefully built accesses onto paths, and nobody knows which is the front or the back of the house. Nobody knows where to go, you know, to knock on which door to knock on. And in fact, actually, it's a guddle. And I'm slightly fearful that that is what is being proposed here. So can you take me through what we've actually got to avoid that particular level of confusion? Because it's, after all, we're trying to create a really nice place, and that's a pretty basic problem if we've got houses around car parks and people going to the wrong bits of the door.
Yeah, I mean, looking at the sort of the design point of view, yes, you're right. The mock-ups tend only to show a sort of low level of cars, and yes, they are. The parking is to the rear of the sort of the housing courtyards, if you will. I mean, in terms of the overall layout, we had quite extensive sort of pre-application discussions prior to this scheme coming in, particularly with my colleagues in Roads who are content with this. And I am slightly ruining the decision because the team leader for Roads Planning did email me and say, you know, do I need to be on the call? And I said, oh no, I'm sure we'll be fine. And here I am answering a question about roads that I could he might have been able to have given a bit more detail on. As I say, my colleagues in Roads are happy with the way the development flows. They're content with the level of parking and visitor parking that's throughout the site. They're content that it works, and it's going to be you know, too much of a guddle, if I can sort of use that sort of term. I mean, in terms of keeping vehicle speeds down, sometimes, you know, and I did kind of hint on it sort of earlier on, where you have a little uncertainty as to where you're going, and that in sort of design and street sort of terms is considered a sort of fairly positive thing, where it really does keep vehicle speeds down until you sort of work out, you know, which way you're going. I kind of hope that answers your question. Maybe not. As I say, I'd maybe have liked a bit of input from Rhodes on that one, but Rhodes have had quite a good look at this one, and they are satisfied that that there's not going to be any issues with this going forward.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jane. Councillor Lever, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, quite a few of my points have been raised and clarified already. Just one outstanding point. Chris, you mentioned 3-storey buildings. Are they 3-storey houses or are they flats?
Those are houses.
Thanks, Chris.
Brilliant. Okay, that seems to be everyone had their questions addressed. Laura, have you come up with a form of words that might reflect the points that Councillor Hislop raised right at the outset?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have, and I've circulated it round my colleagues. I'm waiting for a response from them if it would be possible to come back to me on that one. I was wanting to check with Jamie Little that the wording was acceptable to him. David Sutty's come back saying he's quite happy with it, but if you could possibly come back to me on that.
If everybody's happy, we have no registered speakers, so if we need to wait for a reply from Jamie Little, we'll go on to Chris's next agenda item, and we'll come back to this one if members are content with that, because it would appear that in the main we're happy with the proposal. It's simply the language or the conditions that give us a little challenge. Oh, Councillor Ferguson.
Thanks very much for letting me in, Jim. I'm a wee bit lost here. Chris mentioned something about contributions for education purposes, because we don't normally do that for registered landlords for social housing. And I thought when he said it was wanting to alter it, there was some mention there at the very start about that, but I can't see that in the amended thing that came up in the chat. Maybe Chris can just clarify for me.
I'm sure, but Laura will clarify. But you and I both know this council does not take contributions for education from registered social landlords. Laura.
Thank you, Chair. If you look in the chat, the last part that is in red is "and a mechanism for addressing any developer contributions payable for education purposes applicable at that time." So this is a belt and braces approach to try and cover the situation where it's not an RSL that then carries out this development, and so it's carried out as a private scheme, and so the developer would have to come back to us and give us a proposal as to how they would pay the education contribution, because they, as a private developer, would be liable to pay it, whereas the RSL under current policy would not.
Thanks, Jim. It's a belt and braces. That's fine. Yeah, okay.
Cheers, Andy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and I see Councillor McGregor's back. So, Gail, in case you missed most of this debate, we're just looking for a new form of words for condition 1 on this particular application, which is Curry European Transport Site, and we're waiting a response from the Strategic Housing Officer. So we're going to go on to Chris's next agenda item. So you're bang on time for agenda item 8, and then we're going to go back to agenda item 7 to complete that decision. Stephen Thompson, are you on about 7 or 8?
7, it's just the form of words that's been presented in the chat, and if it's belt and braces, can we extend it so it includes education contributions, but there are other contributions where developer contributions are applied, whether it's in relation to open space, health and social care, waste collection, just a total belt and braces approach. Thank you.
Okay, I think Laura's still dealing with that. Laura, are we right to move on, or have you got a reply now?
Sorry, Chair, I was having issues there with my computer. Yes, I've had a reply from David Sutty. I have entered it into the chat. Hopefully you can see that. What I have inserted is an A and a B alternative, so that we've got the existing situation where it's not an RSL that are the developer, or what you can see in the red is the reason why we would not be looking for an affordable housing restriction at the moment is because the funding is coming from Scottish Government under their Affordable Housing Supply Programme, and as such 100% of it has to be affordable housing. And if this RSL was not doing that, they would have to come up with funding from elsewhere. So that's why I have put in the alternate B, and hopefully that covers the situation that Councillor Hislop said. If I may, Chair, in answer to Councillor Thompson's point about the other the other contributions, the reason why we've restricted it to affordable housing and to education is because my understanding is they are the only two contributions, and Chris can keep me right here, these are the only two contributions which were identified as being potentially relevant. The scheme as built has got open space incorporated into it, but if I'm wrong here, Chris can correct me.
Chris, better not correct Laura, she'll take you to court or something.
No, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, thanks. In that case, Stephen, I presume you're satisfied. Are members content, having read condition 1 in its new version, that this will be acceptable, and on that basis we will agree the report as set out with the amendments to condition 1? If I don't see anything to the contrary, I'll take it as granted, and I'll ask Tracy to confirm the committee's decision. Okay, Tracy. Sorry about this, Gail. It will only be a minute for you. Tracy, can you confirm the decision of the committee in relation to agenda item number 7, Curry European Transport Site, please?
Thanks, Chair. So members have agreed to approve the application subject to the conditions in the report. If you'll allow me, I'm going to read out what Laura's posted in the chat just for the recording purposes and anybody that might be watching on the live stream.
That would be great, Tracy. Thanks for that.
So the amendment to condition 1 is that it will now read that in the event that A, the developer of the proposed housing units hereby approved is not a registered social landlord, or B, the development does not proceed as part of the Scottish Government's Affordable Housing Supply Programme, no development in respect of this approval shall take place unless and until a scheme demonstrating that a minimum of 20% of the units hereby approved shall be solely for the purposes of affordable housing as defined in the Dumfries and Galloway Local Development Plan Policy H5 and relevant associated adopted supplementary guidance, or any document which may act to replace this policy and guidance, be submitted to and approved in writing by the Council as Planning Authority. The said scheme shall detail the location of the said affordable housing within the development, together with details of the mechanism for securing the implementation of this affordable housing provision within the development, a timescale for delivery in comparison with other residential units within the site, and the mechanism for addressing and developer contribution payable for education purposes applicable at the time. Thereafter, the development shall be implemented in full accordance with the approved scheme. And also, if members are approving the amendment to condition 10, which was to reduce the metres from 43 to 25.
Thanks very much, Tracy. I'm sure that was accepted by members when Chris presented that at the outset. So if members are content with that, it's now a matter of public record. Can you just confirm, Tracy, the decision of the committee?
Application approved, Chair.
Thank you, Tracy. Okay, members, move on to agenda item number 8. Consultation regarding an application made under Section 36 of the Electricity Act 1989 for the erection of a wind farm comprising 45 wind turbines, 40 with a maximum tip height of 200 metres and 5 with a maximum tip height of 179.5 metres. Meteorological mast, minimum height 125 metres, construction of substation, forward/control room and compound, up to 10 temporary borrow pits, on-site access tracks and associated infrastructure, at proposed Fosside Community Wind Farm site, 6.8 kilometres north of Langham and extending to Teviot Dale, Scottish borders. The applicant types a Section 36 consultation. The applicant's community wind power for Scottish ministers, reference number 19/0885/S36. The recommendation is raise objections, and the case officer is Chris McTeer. Chris, you take us through your presentation, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you've noted in the committee papers, the applications in front of members today as consultations on national or major development where the council isn't the deciding body need to come to the council's planning applications committee for a decision and consideration. I do have a verbal update for this one. I was wondering whether to do it before the background circumstances to this one, because we're kind of slightly in unusual territory here with this one. But I think just in the interest of keeping things in the correct order, I will do my verbal update first. In paragraph 4.101 of the report, I highlighted a number of policy reasons as to my decision for this one, or the council's recommended decision for this one. Now, in the rush to put the report together, the reasons that were given for our decision are set out at the end of the report, and I didn't include IN1 or HE3, which I had in paragraph 4.101. So my intention was to add IN1 into reason 1 and to create a specific reason for policy HE3, which is archaeology. Obviously the report covers the reasons, in this case, for the recommendation to raise an objection. Once an application goes to a public inquiry, what we have down as our reasons for raising the objection, they become our points of argument. So even if we'd raised it in the report, it really needs to be a reason in itself. So that's the reason for looking to seek to add HE3 as a standalone reason for that. So
if that's the case, Chris, if members agree to accept your recommendation, it'll be an understanding that the recommendations will change and they'll reflect what you've just said.
Yes, that's right. There's 4 reasons for the recommendation. I'm proposing we add a 5th one, again, it's a belt and braces approach, and it's something that we just kind of missed, just putting the report together. So I'll hold my hands up for that one. So just looking at the background to this one, I think it's probably right that I highlight the sort of the background circumstances for this one. So the council was consulted on the application as such. Generally speaking, when we're dealing with Section 36 consultations and also Section 37 consultations too, we're given a timescale in which to make our recommendations back to the Scottish ministers, and more often than not, through one thing or another, we have to extend that, and normally we agree an extension of time with the Scottish ministers. In this case, the Energy Consents Unit. We sort of review it as an ongoing sort of basis. So we had a timescale in place for this one, which we'd agreed. As things were moving on, but now, as I mentioned before, the scheme for this, and that's actually, if you could go on to the next plan, that would be helpful. So you can see the scheme covers parts of both Dumfries and Galloway and the Scottish Borders Council area. Now, while we were still assessing this particular consultation, Scottish Borders Council raised an objection to the application. There were several other objections from statutory consultees for this one, notably the Ministry of Defence, SEPA, HES and NATS. Now, the Energy Consents Unit decided that, obviously with the Scottish Borders Council objecting to it, that would automatically trigger a public inquiry, which is the same, in cases that we've had in the past where we've been the sole planning authority for, be given to a reporter for that. Now, at the time, that effectively ended our involvement with the consultation, and I know that was possibly somewhat controversial, but we found ourselves where we found ourselves. But the DPA, the reporter, has come back to us, and they effectively have opened the door for us to attend the public inquiry for this. So, although I'm presenting this to you today, there is going to be a public inquiry for this particular wind farm. It's probably important that we are involved with that one, and we're discussing that internally as to how we're going forward with that one just now. So again, it's a slightly unusual set of circumstances that we find ourselves in. So, moving on from that particular point, I will go into some of the sort of the nuts and bolts of the application. One thing I would say is that the report that's in front of you today is probably not the full. It's not the full assessment that we would normally have from in terms of Section 36, where we're straight up towards sort of 50 odd pages of report. We're at a very modest 31 or so for this one, and it was simply because the timescales that the reporters unit gave us meant that we just had to focus very much on the key issues of landscape and visual impacts, archaeology, and sort of planning policy more widely for that one. So that's solely what we've focused our response on. But the full responses that we've had back from the council's archaeologist and the council's landscape architect will form part of our submission and part of our evidence to the public inquiry. So if I can just move on to the next slide, please. So that's just a quick site layout. As we note, the application is for 45 wind turbines, and just as a point to note, 13 of them are located in the Scottish Borders Council area, with the remainder being in Dumfries and Galloway. And the Scottish Borders Council have the site access from the A7 as well. So if we can move on to the next slide, please. Again, this is just a bit of turbine detail. Members are very, very familiar with these particular images here. So if we can move on to the next slide, there's two different turbines proposed here. The one's at 200 metres and one's at 179.5 metres. The next slide, please. So this obviously was a consultation that was accompanied by an EIA report. The EIA that was submitted and covered all effects of the development within a particular area. In this case, it was a 45-kilometre study area was in place for the EIA. Next slide, please. So I'll cover just a blade tip ZTV in the picture, and basically the darker the colour, the more visibility there is of the actual proposal in the landscape. Sometimes, and again, once we come on to the visualizations, I'll put my usual caveat in that sometimes they don't reproduce particularly well for PowerPoint presentations, but generally speaking, what you can see in the sort of the map there, the darker colours are sort of focused mostly to the south of Langham and to the west and north of the site. The slightly lighter colours are a sort of reduced number of turbines there. Mainly, as you can see, where the A7 runs past the site, there's not a big sort of visibility of the turbines furthest away from you, hence the reason why the colours there are slightly lighter. If we move on to the next slide, please. Cumulative developments, obviously we take into account cumulative developments as part of the landscape and visual assessment. Most of the cumulative developments, certainly in Dumfries and Galloway, are located to the south and to the southwest of the site. And I'm sure members are familiar with what we're sort of now starting to call the West Langham cluster of development. So that's things like Craig and New Hill, which are up and built, and Cross Dykes as well. Hopsrig, Logan Head, and Little Hartfield, which are all consented at various heights, although we do have other undetermined applications in for tip height extensions for these particular wind farms. Further to the south, you can see Minska and Solway Bank, and further to the west, we've got Minnie Gap, Hairstains, and Dulswinton wind farms as well. So if we can move on to the next slide. This is looking at, and I've only taken a selection of viewpoints for this one. So this is Crumpton Hill, which effectively is on the edge of the site. Now, this is just the proposed image now. Because it's close to the site, the view from here is across the next couple of slides as a panorama, because it is very, very close to the site. So if I can move on to the next one, and to the next slide as well. So that just gives an indication of the sort of the close-up sort of spread of the turbines here. Moving on to the next one, which is viewpoint 13. Not the best picture, but it does give. I think this one probably sort of demonstrates best the spread of the wind farm in the landscape. The A7 runs along the bottom of the slide. You can just see it disappearing into a sort of gap in the hills there. And the next slide kind of shows the development further over. Again, I'm really sorry they sometimes don't reproduce the best for slides, but as part of our assessment, we have the hard copies and the digital copies of these, so we get a proper look at these ones. The next viewpoint, which is viewpoint 16. Is at Castleower Forest, which is west of the site. So this view is looking east to the wind farm. That's that point between Bentpath and Eskdalemuir. So that's a slightly longer distance view. The next one is viewpoint 21, which is from Corrie Common. Now, even when I was looking at the digital image of that one, it wasn't the best one. So I felt the wire line where you can see the development just without the benefit of actual colours, or well, it's a very simple wire line there. So that one kind of gives a longer distance view and the spread across the landscape of the development. Lastly, viewpoint 22 is at a place called Fenton Yett. Which is at a point on the B723, which is the road between Eskdalemuir and Borland, which you'll actually see in the next slide. Slightly better. So that's the point in the road, but you can just make out the spread of the turbines across the horizon there. That more or less concludes the presentation slides. We have, as I say, I have outlined our reasons for the recommendation. As I mentioned at the beginning, I would like to add a fifth separate one, which I think David has put into the chat, or some details into the chat for members to have a look at. So. For the reasons outlined in the report, we're recommending that we raise an objection to this one to the Scottish ministers and notify them as such. I'm happy to take any questions that members might have for this one.
Thanks very much, Chris. And I see David has the recommendation in chat. I've got Councillor Dryborough and then Councillor Stephen Thompson. Actually, please.
Chair, as it says, and I'd like to come in as soon as we get into the session, if it's all right with you.
Oh, sorry, okay. We're still in questions for Case Officer Stephen.
Thanks, Chair. It was just a question on what the total installed capacity is for the implemented or consented developments on page 72 and 3 in the report. Obviously, it speaks a bit later on about the SPP and the intentions for renewable energy. So it was, but I thought the figures that we already have installed in Dumfries and Galloway might have been of use to members to know what we're currently and have agreed to contribute towards that total so far. Thank you. In terms of positive planning gain, if you like.
Stephen, I don't know. Can you help Stephen, Chris?
Sorry, is this the what the installed capacity of Foresight would be, or is this the ones that we're talking about, which we have approved out with the site? Is this the ones to the sort of the southwest?
Stephen?
Yeah, so it's in relation to the list on page 72 and 3 of already installed. Obviously, there's a list there for a reason. It would be helpful if the full information could be there in terms of the planning gain already achieved through those developments, and also the impacts and cumulative impacts, if you like. Thank you.
I suppose going forward, that could be something that we include, bearing in mind that a lot of these developments sort of date back to some of them are dated 2003, and I don't have those figures to hand. I mean, it could be an exercise that we can that we can do, and I suppose going forward it would be interesting to note just exactly how much installed capacity we have in terms of the sort of the wind energy developments, but I don't have a figure to hand, unfortunately.
I think if you're doing that, Chris, it would have to be for every report moving forward, because we didn't want to be staggering information dependent upon what part of the region we're on. So if that's something that you can do, I'm sure I'd be happy if that appeared on every report, but that was something that David all can implement if members wish that to happen. Councillor Hislop?
Thank you, Chair. It's just, if this goes to, it goes to public inquiry and the reporter decides to approve it. Now, I take it our recommendation here is that under no circumstances would we accept it, or do we have the opportunity to put in conditions now or at a later point whereby if you remove 3 or 4 of these turbines it might be acceptable, because we wouldn't want to actually just put in something that at a later date, we would rather have seen if you'd done this, and they might have done it at the public inquiry, or is it a clear case, because there's mention in here of potential mitigation has not been addressed. So is there things there that we would like to see, and should we put that in our response, or are we at this stage just saying under no circumstances do we feel that a development on this site would be acceptable?
Chris, I presume that this is a consultation, not an application. Therefore, we're consulting what's before us, and it's either acceptable or no. And if we start watering it down, we're liable to compromise the council's position, I'd have thought. But Chris, can you answer Councillor Hislop?
I can, yes. It is as the chair says, we're looking at what's in front of us at the moment. So it's the scheme as it sits now. The scheme as it sits is also being looked at by the reporter, but part of the process that we go through with the public inquiry is that part of our submission we have to recommend a set of conditions that we would put in place if the reporter were to go against us, and there is a lot of they try and front load the process as much as possible. So prior to the public inquiry going ahead, there'll be a lot of backwards and forwards between ourselves, Scottish Borders Council, and the applicants, and just in terms of what exactly the conditions entail with that. But it's a very good point, but it is something that comes in as part of the sort of the wider inquiry process.
Cheers, Ivor. Thank you. And I see David Sutty has noted that in future we'll get the capacity, installed capacity that Stephen Thompson has asked about. So that'll come in a future report. Any other questions for the case officer?
Chair, if you didn't mind, Foresight Community Wind Farm, what's the community's interest in this wind farm?
It's a title that they use, Sanker Community Wind Farm. Community Wind Power describe each application as a community wind farm. The community will, I suppose, benefit financially in the commuted sum that they get from the wind company, but it's no community involvement. It's just a title as far as I understand. But can you just clarify that for Councillor McKee, Chris?
Yeah, it's that's just that's the name of the company, and yeah, every development is noted as a community wind farm. But that's just their way of framing their application or their proposal, if you will.
Cheers, Chris. Just a name joke. It's nothing to do with communities being involved in it.
Thank you.
So, there are no questions for the case officer. We're in session. If we're in session, Councillor Dryburgh.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this. Obviously, as I said at the start, I'd written to the reporter asking for an opportunity because of the constituents I have in the Hughes Valley, which has the biggest majority of the wind turbines actually in this wind farm application. And they have lobbied me very well. The situation is that the community wind farm don't do very well with community engagement. And we've seen, for instance, Langham Hughes Westerkirk Community Council put in an objection to this wind farm. The community themselves within the local area of Hughes have a few engineers, they have hydrologists, and they have things like that. So to get this to this position where we could do, as a planning authority, a response to the application is, as far as I'm concerned, a great opportunity to take things forward on behalf of us as a consultee as part of this planning application. The responses that I've had from local constituents has been, really understanding of what the environmental impact assessment has actually been, and they challenge that frequently with the wind power and the DPA. So, taking everything into consideration, Chair, I think that I go along with what my constituents say in News. They're really concerned about this. There's hydrologists who have said there are concerns about the environmental impact assessments. There are concerns about roads issues and things like that. Not including, obviously, the council's circle architectural side of things written within the report. With the addition of the other condition that Chris mentioned, I would like to agree with the officer's recommendation on this and move it so that we put an objection forward, Chair.
Thanks very much, Archie. And I know Chris did say, or David has put in the chat, additional fifth ground of objection, but Chris is always going to add to one of the original conditions. I think it's L1 has been omitted. So there's an amendment to one condition or recommended condition and an additional fifth ground of objection. Is that right, Chris?
That's correct, Chair. Yes, I'm proposing to add policy IN1 into the first reason for recommendation, and add a separate fifth one that covers policy HE3, which is archaeology.
Thanks very much, Chris. So, Councillor Driver has made a proposal. I'd be looking either for a seconder or an alternative proposal. And if there's none, I'll take it as a unanimous decision of this committee that we go with the officer's recommendation, including the amendment to the recommendations to be put to the Scottish Government, to the reporter. I don't see any additional speakers, so I will take it that it's a unanimous decision. Tracy, can you confirm the unanimous decision of the committee, please, and include in the inclusion of additional recommendations in one agenda item and an additional one in a fifth ground of objection? You can put that better than me, Tracy.
Thank you, Chair. Members have agreed to raise objections on the grounds detailed in the report, with the amendment to ground 1, which will now include policy IN1 on renewable energy, and an additional ground 5, which will cover policy HE3 on archaeology, and that will take on board the points raised in paragraph 2.2 of the report.
Superb. Thanks very much, Tracy, and thanks, Chris, for being with us today. We move on to the last agenda item, which is agenda item 9, the installation of a flue to the northwest elevation at Kirkbank House, English Street, Dumfries. The application is listed building consent application. The applicant is Freeze Galloway Council, reference number 21/2273/LBC. The recommendation is to approve unconditionally. The case officer was Jamie Mackenzie, but David Sutty is taking us through this. So, David, you take us through the last report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Kind of the first slide, please. I'm sure you're all aware where Kirkbank is, adjacent to the main council office. And the site here is actually in the northwest elevation, which is really to the rear. So it's hidden from all the views on the principal elevation. The only view you'd really get of this is either wandering round the building or potentially from the graveyard in the church next door. And the next slide shows, it says existing. Unfortunately, the works have been carried out as the future slides will show. So take that's previous. You can see in more or less the centre of the slide on the single-storey flat roof building there was a flue there before. And the next slide shows what is now required. Basically, this is the central heating boiler for the building, and to meet current standards as part of the refurbishment of Kirkbank, which is being undertaken at the moment. Then there was a need to actually make sure that the flue met current standards. So the next slide will show you, it's really just, if you see on the top left-hand side is where the flue is, so it is hidden from the principal elevations. Next slide just shows that the fixings would be non-ferrous into the sandstone. And the next slide shows what was there, not an item of beauty itself either. It was aluminium, which is anodised over time. And the next slide shows what has actually gone in already, which at least before it went in, there was discussions with Mizzy Marshall, who's our, for want of a better phrase, conservation officer, and Mizzy advised about the need to make sure that it was fixed in with non-ferrous materials and that it be of a colour which was more suited to the sandstone of the building. The next slide is just again from the rear of the building, so you can just see where above the scaffolding that you're seeing there, just popping up. And the last slide, it just shows it again. Obviously disappointing that this has taken place. Paragraph 4.4 sets out the justification from the relevant applicant section as to why this had to take place as part of the works to ensure that the building was heated over the winter months. But other than that, that's basically all I had to say on this one. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks very much, David. Questions for the case officer? Councillor Hislop, Ivor.
Thank you, Chair. It's with regard to paragraph 4.4. It says here that pre-application discussions were had and unacceptable materials were found. Are we able to have pre-application discussions with some applicants easier than others? Because last month we had an application in Dalton whereby there was pre-application discussions, there was a new plan put in that was acceptable, and then it was refused at committee by the officers who had said it was acceptable. Whereas on this one, it was because we didn't have the full policy things there at the pre-application discussions. Here we have a council one application, but we have all the policies at the pre-application time. Is there a difference between the two applications whereby some people are able to access more information?
Well, every application is done in its merit, Ivor, but David, can you respond to Ivor, please?
Thank you, Chair. It's obviously open to anybody to seek a formal pre-application inquiry, and there's a route for doing that. My understanding of this was it was basically an internal conversation, not a formal pre-application inquiry, which is a different route. It was basically the work needed to be carried out and sought the appropriate officer's advice in terms of design and materials.
Thanks, Ivor. Thanks, David.
Chair, another thing was with regard to the colour. I'm thinking back to one that we had before, whereby it was the Aston Hotel. Should we not have had, is it pre-patented copper put on, the sort of green colour? That's a joke.
Serious, Ivor, serious. Okay, members. No more questions for the case officer. We're in session. No observations, no proposals. We just go with the recommendation as set out in the papers.
Agreed.
Super duper. Members, that concludes the business for today. Thank you for forbearance and for your involvement and contributions. See you in a month's time. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you for providing lunch.